Hello, hello, welcome, welcome. I'm sorry I'm covered in sweat. I had to run out and I forgot to bring my kid's sleeping bag to his daycare today, and then I had to run back. So I'm covered in sweat in hot Taipei today. Before I get to the super chats, I'm going to talk about the topic a little. And that was marriage and whether or not and what George R. R. Martin, how he feels about it. Getting married in 40 days. I hope this doesn't change my outlook on marriage. No, but so one thing you got to remember with marriage and George R. R. Martin in general and Ice and Fire and all of this is that how we feel today in 2023 is strikingly different than even when George R. R. Martin was writing a Dance with Dragons. Certainly different from when he was writing a Game of Thrones. And George R. R. Martin's attitudes and feelings, at least at the time of beginning a Game of Thrones, was still caught up in the 60s and 70s. Like he's a boomer hippie guy, and he was still very much caught up in those ideas. And one of the big philosophical debates that was going on during the hippie period, amongst the hippies, was free love. And you hear the term free love, and you kind of get these ideas about it, mainly because the conservative movement was very successful in labeling free love something it kind of wasn't. Like, you say free love and you think, oh, people are just willing to fuck me. Like free love. It's just everybody polyamorous. Everyone's fucking right and left. It's a bunch of slutty hippies in a tent. It's great. But that wasn't really what the idea was about. Like the intellectuals were questioning uh marriage's function in traditional American society. And keep in mind that, like, marriage prior to, fairly recently, was a something done for family alliances or wealth, keeping wealth within families. And this is why you see cousin marriages so often. In fact, most of the time it was something called cross cousin marriage. It wasn't just that you married your cousin and it was a one time deal. It was like your kids would marry another set of cousins, and their kids would marry another set of cousins, and it would keep wealth within a particular house. And so, um, why does George pretend to know George as a person? I don't know, dude. I just read all of his fucking shit. Okay, that's all. Okay, Jesus Christ. Why? I'm basing it on what I'm reading here. Okay, this is why we're here, Dylan. Jesus Christ. Free love with these gas prices. Anyway, so and we'll get so this modern notion that marriage should be based on romantic love is fairly new. And like, when we think today, even this notion today, like a 2023 notion of marriage, which is, if two people love each other, they should get married. Even that, like, you go back 20 years, 30 years, is not necessarily the idea of marriage. People think, oh, romantic love with the interest of building a family, like procreation being kind of built into this idea of, like, first comes love, then comes marriage, then comes then comes little baby in the carriage. Like, there was always this notion, and so, like, we have a constantly shifting idea of of uh of what marriage is and what marriage should be, you know. And so, keep in mind, marriage was originally for family alliances and wealth, and keeping wealth within families. And then religion kind of sticks its nose in various places, and there's this idea of holy matrimony, that you're somehow bound between before God and stuff like that. But the idea is that marriage is very much a social thing. And free love was saying, wait a minute, shouldn't marriage only be about the interested parties? Like, shouldn't only the interested parties have a voice in what marriage is? And certainly today, I think many of us in modern Western society like agree with that. Like, yeah, like, you know, if you went to your friends and you said, you know, I really love this person and I want to marry them, but my parents are against it, your friends would say, who fucking cares about your parents, right? Impossible idea 60 years ago, you know, like impossible. And so when you look at and so like what free love was wanting as a philosophical movement, like we've somewhat achieved. There's still, I would say today in Western society, there's still a lot of wealth ideas about wealth and health decisions and things like that with regards to marriage. But this idea that it should be only involving the interested parties, and they should, you know, through, you know, two people's consent come together to form a bond. That idea of free love is actually kind of won out. Now, taking it back to like George and Ice and Fire and like everything he's written. Keep in mind all of his sci-fi stories, every single one of his sci-fi stories, there is no marriage in the universe. Like marriage is not a thing in any of his sci-fi stuff. And the idea of, in the speculative fiction kind of sense, that like what would be the function of marriage in a futuristic society? Like why would anyone get married? You know? And that's kind of a funny telling thing. And even when you go beyond that, like most of the stories, like Armageddon Rag or Fever Dream, you don't have people married either. And even though like the characters aren't married. And George R. R. Martin, though George R. R. Martin did get married to Gail, his first marriage, which he was married about 5 years. Afterwards, he was with Paris for a good 17 years and didn't get married. And he only got married at age 62, which I kind of think is probably because he wanted the Social Security benefits for Gail. And so you sort of say to yourself, well, what is the function of marriage? Like, and in the past, marriage was utilized in bad ways and repressive ways so often. You're talking about families forcing people into marriage situations, which means you're having sex with someone that you don't like, unwilling because your family decided it. And when we look at the law, you know, in America, even in America, like 60, 70 years ago, like spousal rape was legal. You know, like horrible stuff like this was like on the books, or at least it wouldn't be punished at the same degree as non-spousal rape. You know, a lot of countries, spousal rape is still perfectly fine. You know, child marriages are perfectly fine. Families arrange your marriages. It's a weird kind of thing to think about, because obviously, like in our modern Western like mindset, we just get so used to the idea that no, I'm searching for someone I love, and when I find someone I love, I'm just going to marry them, and then I don't have to worry about anything else. But it's so it's so we also look at Ice and Fire, and I realized I was going through Ice and Fire, and I was like, is there in Ice and Fire a single incident of marriage that is portrayed as positive? Like, is there a single point in which there's a married couple and you're like, good old fashioned marriage, there it is, you know? Like, is there, like, in every single situation, there's something creepy and wrong about the situation. Even Ned and Kat, you know, Kat describes this story of having sex with a stranger and it being really weird. Like she was engaged to the dude's like older brother, and then all of a sudden she has to have sex with a stranger. Now, she grew to love him over many years, but like it was such a it's a very odd story, right? Um like there's not a single incident. There's not a single, and it's funny because as well because they like a lot of this discussion is reflected in comparing, say, the Faith of the Seven, where you can't even get out of an arrangement to get married without the High Septon, comparing it to the Gods of the North, where it is just two people in front of a werewood. Like, and it seems so queer to people. Like, oh, two people having an individual situation in front of a werewood? Like, that could be a marriage? What? How is that binding? And you realize, oh, marriage is all about society and stuff like this. So it's all very odd. And so I would say in the end that like a big part of Ice and Fire, at least when George began, was pointing out that like there's not necessarily any benefit, or or he doesn't believe that there's much benefit to marriage, that for the most part it was used to brutalize people and control them. There's not a single example of marriage being positive in Ice and Fire. And this is a funny thing because, obviously, like, George was married twice, but like, I think it does get down to his hippie ideals. When Osha told Bran about her happy marriage was positive until she came back as a zombie. Are you thinking about cats? Osha's still alive in the book. I never came back as a zombie. Anyway, there's a lot. I'm sure there's a lot of ideas about this, but I love my girlfriend, but her husband hates me. What's very funny is I was reading about how marriage changed in Soviet Russia. And in Soviet Russia, so prior to the Soviets taking over under the Tsar, marriage was unbreakable. You could not. And so if people didn't like their spouse, they would move out and just move in with somebody else. And that was it. And then later, like the Soviets took over and they're like, no. You cannot cohabitate with someone that's not your spouse. And so the state would actually force you to get divorced and remarry the person you were living with. Which is very kind of funny. I mean, it's a little blend of like the common law marriage kind of idea, but like you can common law divorce. Like you're not living with the person, well, you're divorced. The state's just coming in and going, no, you're divorced, and this is your new spouse. Done deal. It's very kind of funny. Good morning, Preston. Thinking about visiting Taiwan soon. What's the best time of year? The three must-dos. What city would you recommend the most? Taiwan is very hot in the summer. It's best to come in the autumn or winter. I would say that when examining Taiwan, it's best to think about it in terms of natural beauty, because that's what it has in spades. So I would recommend that you go to, if you have the time, to go to Taroko Gorge and Ali Shan. And other than that, like those two biggies, like, and Taroko Gorge is just absolutely incredible. And Ali Shan is quite beautiful. But like, if you focus on it and in terms of like, I have to see nature kind of thing, because it's got a lot of nature. 2/3 of the country is covered in wood. It's just woods, like, and that's largely due to the fact that it's mountainous. But like the cities, city to city, honestly, there's not that much difference. Like there's not that much like huge difference that you're gonna notice as a tourist. Like if I had to explain like, oh, actually in the South they're much more Hokkien, they're much more Taiwanese, like Fujian culture Taiwanese, as opposed to Aboriginal culture Taiwanese, as opposed to like mainland like Guomindang coming over Taiwanese. Like you're not going to notice that as a tourist. So like I think in the sense like you don't have to really worry about like when you see like, oh, should I visit Taichung or Tainan or Kaohsiung? I'd be like, yeah, like as there's a few things to see there, but as a tourist, it's not that important. Like I would focus on Taroko Gorge and trying to get to Alishan, um, and other than that, like that's just it's fine. It's but that's about it. Like I mean, just worry about seeing Taipei and the rest of the cities are fine. But there's nothing where I'd break your back to go down and visit Tainan. So I don't know. Just focus on seeing the gorge first thing, Taroko Gorge, and then worry about everything else after that. You have an overanalyzing video in your hot deep playlist. Oh, sorry. Also, when do you plan? I'll clean this stuff up sometimes. Also, do you plan on making use of the nickname Golden Hand? Other character nicknames. I think Golden Hand. We're talking about the fanfic here. I do think Golden Hand is gonna come back as a kind of joke. A little bit, and character nicknames are a big part of the story, and sort of and like for instance, we utilize nicknames a bit in the Area Hota like sample chapter, like and just some fun stuff into getting like where these nicknames came from, and so I do think that nicknames are gonna play a bit of a role. I'm trying to think if anything else like on the horizon with them, because we use nicknames a bit when we were talking about like in the Sam chapter, when they nicknamed Robert Frey Butcher's Boy, or things like that, like getting into these little how brutal of a nickname that is, and stuff like that. So it's definitely something that's always on my mind, getting into the story. But yeah, nicknames super important. P, I thought I was losing my mind before finding your stuff. I owe as much to you as to George R. R. Martin for making this my new major obsession. Thanks. Oh, thank you, Moon Man. That's really nice to hear. I generally go through life thinking I don't really have an influence on anyone. But yeah, it's fun stuff, and the thing about like these little obsessions is it just keeps your mind active and thinking about different philosophical ideas. You want to challenge your thoughts and challenge your beliefs and constantly be thinking. And so I think George is against arranged marriage. Well, certainly he's against arranged marriage. But then the idea is like, what is marriage if not like the arrangement aspect of it? Like, and keep in mind that like as a person who chose their spouse and of my own volition, and my spouse chose me of my own volition, you sort of say like, well, what is the function of marriage past like the social aspects? And I would have my own beliefs about this. Like, keep in mind, this is not George's belief, but I believe that like marriage provides the function. Like, I do believe that marriage provides a certain function of like legal automatic aspects. Like, if I get into a coma, instantly my spouse like knows what to do, or like all of my wealth is like when I die is going to go to my spouse. But at the same time though, like I wanted to have children. Like if I didn't want to have children, I wouldn't necessarily see a function in marriage. Because I'd just be like, well, I don't care what happens to me. Like if I'm in a coma, I don't care what happens to my money afterwards. After I die. So it's like my concept for my personal self is rooted in family building, but like other people's concepts of marriage and like why they get married, they do it for different reasons. But But I think there is a function in that there's a social aspect to marriage in that you get everybody together and you legally bond yourself, and it's really difficult to undo it. And it's sort of like saying, like you're setting up roadblocks for yourself on purpose. You know, it's like getting a tattoo. Like, oh, never forget. Like, oh, like you were gonna forget. Like, well, now you got the tattoo. It's the same thing with marriage. Like, you know, like you're. So I personally do think there's plenty of function to marriage, but I can understand the position of like, what good does it do for people? Like if they're not thinking about pulling the plug instances or having kids or passing on wealth, say they have no wealth to pass on, so they're not really worrying about it. Like, what's the function of it? You know, is there any positive function to it? Like, why, if you want to break up with somebody, break up with somebody. Like, why do I have to deal with the state, like, or the church, you know, getting in there, you know? But yeah, there's just a lot, because there's a lot of weirdness to it, man. Like, even when I went to college, ugh, even when I went to college, I knew so many kids who were like dating someone, and then they had to break up because they're like, you know, in the end, I want to marry a blank, like, and it's usually somebody of the same religion, even though they're atheists and they don't believe in God. They're like, they're not Hindu, they're not Jewish, they're not Catholic. So, and you're like, well, what does that have to do with? Oh, it has to do with your families. Oh, it's just a lot easier because of the families. And then it's all of a sudden it's everybody else getting into your business, you know? So I think, you know, I don't necessarily think it's like, I'm sure George is all for freedom. Like, you can do what you want. If you want to get married, get married. But like, what is the function of marriage? Is the question to ask yourself, especially when reading Ice and Fire. Like, what's the function of these marriages? Is there any good coming from these marriages? You know? Preston, you're one of the good things on this planet. Thank you. These are so many nice comments today. So many nice comments today. Except for I'm a big believer in arranged marriages. George is romantic. He's just cynical. The thing is like all people that have, it's funny that the people that are like the most cynical are the ones that are the most idealistic, right? Because they're the ones that like, they have this like notion of how things ought to be. And then they see the things on the ground and how much they suck. And so, you know, like, it's funny how that is, that like people with like the most idealistic people are actually like very negative and cynical about the things on earth. I think D&D were going to do Taisha, but they changed their minds because season 3 and 4 they do mention her with Tyrion saying he was married. Thoughts? Taisha is a very interesting question about marriage as well, right? Like that, there's a situation where Tyrion actually like finds somebody that you know he loved and like has this romantic notion of marriage, and then it goes to shit because of family. I think D&D, honestly, like let's be fair to D&D, okay? Let's be fair to D&D, okay? You've got this story that's got like a million threads, and D&D has to wrap it all up. And you know, let's be honest, they didn't wrap it up early, like, well, but they did wrap it up. I mean, they didn't wrap it up well, but they wrapped it up. And, you know, when I ask, like, do I think George can even wrap it up? No. Like, he's not going to do anything unless he does it well. But can he wrap it up? No, I don't think George can. Wrapping it up is really, really difficult. And I think when D&D looked at that and you're like, fuck, another plot line? Am I going to fucking pull out Taisha and deal with that plot line and have that all resolved? Like, that's a whole can of worms. Um, and so I just don't think D&D wanted to deal with it. It's just like so much. Um, so, but yeah, like they were following the book. They thought Taisha was going to be a thing. They got further along. They said, "Oh crap, we have all this stuff that we have to we bring together," and and then and then they're just like, "No, no, no, no. We got other things to deal with. Other things to deal with." And this, that's like being fair, just being fair to D&D. Um, People make fun of Alabama, but you can marry your uncle in Rhode Island. Yeah, it's actually it's not necessarily very intuitive what states have like age of consent laws and like incest laws and stuff like that. Like you'd probably pull up a map and be surprised of like what's legal in your state, what's not legal in another. Because people haven't revisited these laws. Like they're just not coming up. People weren't marrying their uncles, so they're like, it's legal, but because it wasn't ever like a thing, So first comes marriage, then comes divorce. Yeah, yeah. Um, I mean, I know plenty of people who got divorced where I really thought like their relationships would work out, and they didn't. And it's fine. It's fine. It's all fine. You can do what you want. Um, Maybe Bran becomes king via proxy, warging someone. This is something that this is something that came up when people discussed the ending, that Bran was going to be king, but people are like, well, maybe it's Jon really king, and like Bran is like creepily like puppet mastering him in the end, which that's a really weird, creepy ending. It's very George R. R. Martin in how creepy it is. I don't know if he would choose it for his magnum opus. Like that's a really dark, like cynical, freaking ending in the end. Like I'm just gonna puppet master. I mean, maybe if it's John's dead body and there's no John like lingering around in there, but like in a Hodor sense, of like Hodor getting pushed to the back, like being John Malkovich kind of horror story. Um, but I've ranted about this before, like why I hate being John Malkovich, and like you're not going to address like the fundamental horror that like all of these characters just kind of like nonchalantly like push aside, like imprisoning someone in their own mind. Like it's because in the Dark Tower, like it's something that's immediately brought up when the issue of taking over somebody's mind like comes in. Like the first thing our protagonist thinks is like, what a horrible human being he would be if he took over someone's mind, and like it would be like the worst form of murderous thievery. He called it. This is Roland on the airplane in Drawing of the Three. If anybody's talking about like Dark Tower, but like he immediately like thinks this like the minute like Worgen comes in like as a concept in Dark Tower. The fact that like Bran doesn't think about it um is an issue. I mean, he's a little boy, but it's like gonna come up in the fanfic a bit. Like how like what a brutal, horrible person Bran is being to Hodor. Um, but yeah, would Bran like grow into the dark individual to animate a dead body and rule? I mean, it's dark. It's dark. I just don't know if it's like dark enough to like if he'd want to end his magnum opus that way, because that's fucking brutal. It's freaking brutal, especially if like John were still in there. Oh, um, is marriage social or biological? Because some animals have one mate for life. Free love is definitely in support of orgies, though. Um, so that I think you're conflating marriage and I'm gonna say monogamy. Uh, in a sense, like even though monogamy like means marriage, but like you're like being with one person in a monogamous relationship versus marriage. Like you can stay in a monogamous relationship for like your entire life, and lots of people have done this. I think Goldie Hawn and Kurt Russell. How long have they been? They have been together for. Goldie Hawn and Kurt Russell have been together for 40 years and they are unmarried. You know? 40 years. Meeting in that very problematic movie, Overboard. Or I think they knew each other, but they sparked their romance in this very weird movie called Overboard, where this woman, this rich woman, pays Kurt Russell, who's like a carpenter, to like build a closet, and he doesn't she doesn't pay him or something, and then she falls over the boat and like gets amnesia. So he like has her, he like convinces her that she's his wife, so that she can like do chores to like work off the debt. And then romance blooms, and then like, I mean, it's just like, oh my god, like the problems with the movie, right? But anyway, after that they've been together 40 years. And you know, if you love one person and you want to stay with one person, stay with one person. But like the marriage aspect is like, means that you would like to bring in some sort of social aspect. You're either bringing in the state or your family members and friends, or you're bringing in a religion to say that like that this union is like authorized by one of these sets of people, either your social circle, the church, or the state, right? Like, because if you don't have any of those three, or don't care about the opinions of those three, then like there's no function, right? And I'd say that like in at least America, I'm unfamiliar with laws in many other Western societies. I know that in Sweden, like half of people don't bother getting married because it's just there's not much benefit to it. In America, there's a lot of legal benefits to marriage, and so like if you're with somebody for a long time, like yeah, you should probably get married because there's a lot of great legal benefits that come from being married. You know, namely Social Security. Social Security being an enormous one. So, but yeah. I'm never gonna get married because I'm never gonna grow up. Yeah. Man, a lot of Islam, a lot of Islam discussions here. Look, Islam is like any other religion. Okay. Do I think the Middle East would be any different had they all been Christian, or if they all been Jewish, or they all been Hindu? No, it would be the exact same. It would just be it would be the exact same. They would have just chosen a different costume to fix it all up in, you know. But like, you know, like these people, like when they take like when they try to differentiate these religions, like, you know, it's all roughly the same thing, you know. It's have like knowing a lot about Islam and knowing a lot about Christianity, and comparing the two, I will say that like when you read the tenets of Islam, like objectively speaking, like they're not as lovey feel good as like New Testament, but they're not as like brutal as Old Testament. So like, you know, Quran and Hadith is like kind of in between, like objectively speaking. But of course, everything's about interpretation. So you can like interpret the Old Testament quite liberally. Like I know super liberal rabbis who are like only going with the Torah, who like read the stories of the Torah and like and their interpretations are like incredible. Like, I read this one essay by this rabbi who was like, the story of Passover is a story in which God is telling us to be charitable to others. And I was like, how is that? And you like read it, because like the story of Passover is essentially like, you know, Moses is calling down plagues upon the Egyptians, or God is putting plagues on the Egyptians, and the firstborn Egyptian children are all smited and murdered by God, and but the Jewish firstborn are not, because they like put something on their door, and so their firstborns are passed over, and so like it's a pretty like dark holiday when you think about it, right? Like, yay, like our firstborns weren't killed while everybody else's were. And like this rabbi wrote this incredible essay, and I read it and I'm just like, wow. He argued that of course we're supposed to think about that. Of course we're supposed to be thinking about our own notions of luck and how fortunate we are, and how we should be going out and like realizing that everybody else like has a bad lot in life and that we should be helping them. Like, of course, like how can you not read that story and think that? Of course that's what God's message is. And I was like, you know, it's like I read the essay and I'm like, that's a beautiful way to interpret it. I don't think that was what was in people's mind when they wrote it. When they wrote it, they're just like, Egyptians evil, us good. Like, that's fine. But, you know, when you have a good heart interpreting crappy text, you're going to get a good heart message. If you have a bad heart interpreting good messages, you're going to get a, you know, like you're going to get a bad thing in the end. So like, I don't think it's like, I think focusing on Islam is not the problem. It's focusing on like being a crazy, like religious fundamentalist who wants to combine church and state and you know, implement their beliefs on other people. Like, you know, there's nothing in Islam that says to do that. It's just, or Christianity that says to do that. It's just people's interpretation of it. North American culture romanticizes marriage. It does. It does. It's, there's a lot of like odd ideas about like Western concepts of romance, and even Western concepts of romance have even become metaphysical and like religious. Like, oh, I need to find the one. And you're like, what does that mean? Like, the one? Like, you think like God has like put like one person on this planet for you? Because there's nothing in Christianity, Islam, or Judaism that like says that God would be worried about that. You know, like, and yet there's this like unofficial kind of belief that like, oh no, like fate, like there's the one out there. There's this like romantic, religious, metaphysical idea, like, that of like romance ruling all. And I can somewhat understand it in the sense, because like romance is so powerful. There's not a more powerful feeling that humans have than romance. It's why all music is written about romance, right? 90% of songs are written about romance, either like getting together or breaking up, and all of the very powerful emotions related to that. You know, but that, so yeah, it's all very odd. It's all very odd. I'm actually surprised how many like that major religions like divorce the very emotional feeling of romance from their doctrine, considering it's the most powerful like feeling in life is romance. I mean, maybe the birth of your children. That too. In Soviet Russia, you don't change marriage changes you. Yeah, you remember Yakov Smirnoff? Yakov Smirnoff, he's not actually, he's Soviet, but I want to say he's not actually Russian. Ukrainian. He's Ukrainian. Yeah. Yakov Smirnoff. He's still alive. He's from Odessa. 72 years old today. Good old Yakov Smirnoff. Um, yeah, Smirnoff is often credited as inventing the popularized Russia reversal joke, in which in Soviet Russia, and then you flip it. In America, there is plenty of light beer. You can always find at a party. In Russia, party always finds you. It's true. It's true. Um, oh well, he just kind of disappeared. I mean, his joke only went so far. Um, but oh, he produced a PBS comedy, Happily Ever Laughter, which was PBS's special of the year. Hmm, hmm, hmm. Can't say thanks for being awesome, specifically on discussing masculinity. Any chance of schedule? Oops, I'm sorry. Any chance of scheduling these through YouTube a few days early so we know? Sure, sure. I often think about like whether I should do it the night before and things like that. And I probably should. It just it's usually, around this time on Sunday, but the reason is that occasionally, my kid gets sick or something comes up, and so I don't want to like disappoint people, but I'll try to schedule things a bit earlier so people know, and it's on people's calendars. There's no reason I can't do it the night, but at least a few more hours before. But it has to do with um kids. Um it's funny the issue of masculinity. I was thinking about it a little more, a bit today, because it's odd. I do think about masculinity a bit because, one, it's so prevalent in American society, and it's so prevalent on YouTube right now. Like what it is to be a man. Like now, like Joe Rogan or Hassan Piker being like the examples for like American boys to like look up to, which is fucking weird, right? Um, and it's odd because like I'm raising two boys, and I think about like you're constantly analyzing like, well, how am I analyzing these boys, and what did I like about the way my father raised me, and what did I dislike about the way my father raised me, and things like that. And I also think about the Taiwanese and how Asians perceive masculinity. Because even though there are some Taiwanese people that are a bit Americanized here, but for the most part, like American concepts of masculinity that are very prevalent, I would say, in America and in Australia. Like you've got to go to the gym and bench a bunch, and be a man in that sense. And then there's like other harmful, toxic ones like that are prevalent more globally, like alcoholism, being able to hold your liquor, drinking all the time. Asia is more focused, like to be a man is to be a-emotional. And there are aspects of the a-emotional aspect to American masculinity, but we tend to just focus on like sadness. Like an American man is a man if he doesn't show sadness, like, oh, I'm not going to cry. I'm not going to cry. I'm never going to cry. Men don't cry. You know, maybe I can get a lone tear at a funeral or something, but like coming out of the side of my eye. But God forbid I have a bad day and my face contort and I'm like, because then, oh man, I'm a pussy then, like, and so, in Asia, it's everything. It's if you're a man, like losing your temper is a very unmasculine thing in Asia. Like you want to be Chow Yun Fat, like Chow Yun Fat, hard boiled, just like no emotion, deliver everything. Like, oh really? Like, I've lost everything, and like, or like, oh, you've killed my family. Like no anger at all. Like showing anger as like somewhat masculine, right? In Western society, but like in Asia, it's like no. You show nothing. Like that's it. No emotion. What's funny is the Middle East has none of that. Like the Middle East, like you can be emotional all the time at work, cry, scream. It's like that's just like normal. Like being emotional all the time. Kind of weird. Kind of weird. Um, oh, made some Elden Ring notes for you, Preston. Gonna post in chat. Thank you, thank you. I'm it's something I've been thinking of in the long true term about how comparing Elden Ring to Ice and Fire, because man, it's just kind of funny. But thank you on that. Um, yeah, I probably post it in the comments when the stream is done versus like the chat, so I can't won't be able to really find it. Oh, here they're all coming. Oh no, Melania was the greatest swordsman and then lost her sword arm. Oh no. um um what the fuck's a Lami? Lami Greenhands is named after Lami Thorne from Night Flyers. I don't know if there's anything to it other than that. It's just that there was this character named Lami Thorne who you also get Alistair Thorne from, and Lami Greenhands, and then there was Lami, but that's it. Just a character from Night Flyers, and it always makes me think of, I don't know if you guys ever saw Next on Lami, but Next on Lami was this little internet thing where you get like 5 seconds of the episode at the beginning, and then there's a Next on Lami, and the next episode's fucking bonker. Like the preview for the next episode is bonkers. I always think of that when I think of Lami Greenhands. Did the happily married Stannis showing up at the wall surprise you on the first read? If he defeats Ramsay, where does his story lead King's Landing? I was absolutely fooled. I was absolutely when that was one of those moments where like I like had a huge smile. I might have even started laughing at the moment. Like, oh my gosh, I cannot believe this happened. Like, what? And it was one of those moments where I'm just like, this is an incredible story. Like, Stannis showing up at the wall. Like, I'm sure a lot of people had those moments, but like, man, where I was just like, wow, that's crazy. Um, I'm a sucker for like plot threads coming together and weaving in and out in a story. I fucking love that stuff. I'm a real sucker for it. Yeah. But where does Stannis go? After, it's a funny thing because like Stannis is always kind of a bit of a hypocrite, and it's mainly because like what people say about Stannis is the exact opposite of what we see Stannis being on the ground. So they always say like, oh, Stannis is so hard and rigid. And you actually find that Stannis is insanely flexible. Like insanely flexible. Like he'll like punish one person and then not another person, and then he'll make an alliance with somebody here and then not somebody here, and he's all over the map. And so despite everybody saying like, oh, he's brittle and hard, like I don't know, man. Show me a situation where he's brittle and hard, except for maybe like with his brother, like not caving to anything Renly said, like is about like the most rigid he's ever been. But other than that, he's been pretty flexible. And so the idea is like he's talked a big game about, oh, my job is to like fight the others, and my job is to like pretend to like act like a king so people will know I'm a king. But in fact, like, he's just gonna take whatever and do whatever that suits him at the moment. And so, if he defeats Ramsay, does would he start marching south? He doesn't quite have like the army yet. You know, he doesn't have enough people. Like if he defeats Ramsay, he's still, and he got Manderley and his ships and stuff. Maybe he's going to quickly conquer the north. You know, maybe take the Dreadfort and everything. But he still like doesn't have like enough forces to really go down and do anything. And so I don't know what he would do. You know, he's got the amount of time that it would take Justin Massey to go to Essos to get sellswords to bring them in is just too long. Like it's too long in the story to make a difference. Because I mean, Massey's going to take a month to get back to the wall, and then he's got to go to Eastwatch, and then he's got to go to Bravos, and then he's got to spend weeks, months, like finding a sellsword army if he can, and then bring them back. It's just, dude, it would be so much. It'd be so much. So, I mean, I love Stannis, and I think it would be interesting, but he would, the only hope he would have is to get a hold of the Weeper's army somehow. And so which would mean he would have to stay in the north a little bit longer to get a hold of the Weeper's army, and rule them. And then maybe he could head south, but that would also take time. So it's like I see him lingering in the north a bit longer. I don't know if he'd return to the wall or if he'd die. You know, you do just kind of get the sense that maybe he'll defeat Ramsay, but I don't know if he has much. I don't know if he has much future after that. Not to mention that the others are going to invade. It's like either you've got the Weeper invading, or you've got the others invading, and so, you know, he's gonna be killed. He's gonna be killed by somebody. He's either gonna get killed by Ramsay, or he's gonna get killed by the Weeper, or he's gonna get killed by the others. And that's gotta happen. Gotta happen soon. It's gotta happen soon. You know, like him coming down and like causing trouble south of the neck. I just don't see it. It's too crowded of a story. You've got this Dance of the Dragons that's gonna happen south of the neck, and Stannis doesn't have the men to really participate, and so yeah. Preston on his libertarian arc. I will never be a libertarian. I will never be a libertarian. No. Libertarians, like, there's some fundamental flaws to like their thinking that they never really address. And so, happy birthday, Ethoris. Happy birthday. Think about the societies that focus on polygamous relationships versus monogamous. The thing is polygamy is not really very common, even in societies that supposedly focus on it. I mean, you got a few examples. Like if you go to like Saudi, maybe you're gonna get a few more. If you go to like country like Chad, it's pretty common there. But for the most part, polygamy, even in countries where it's legal, like people just don't participate in it. And it's mainly because when I ask people, it's mainly because they don't want to participate in it. They love their spouse, and that's enough for them. But, but yeah, I mean, generally speaking, I'm against polygamy. I don't necessarily think it's needed anymore. It was originally a Social Security program, but I think with other laws and Social Security and stuff like that, you don't really need polygamy. You can just, if you want to get divorced and marry somebody else, get divorced and marry somebody else. You know, we've got serial monogamy. Why do you need polygamy? Likely covered in the past, but was Quaithe just George R. R. Martin gardening time traveling Dany? Obviously with similarities to Bran, Thread Raven, House of the Undying Visions. But I can't think how it fits with having a second time traveler. I don't know if, like, logically speaking, a second time traveler can ever make sense. I understand they tried to do it in Quantum Leap, and it didn't it didn't really make sense. Because like with a second time traveler, how are you aware of the other person's like changes, and how can you stop them and prevent them? Or I guess Star Trek had the temporal Cold War and things like this. Like if time's been changed, how are you aware of it? So I don't know. Like George R. R. Martin is very logical when he thinks about time travel. He like tries to come up with a logical solution. The been trying to deal with like, man, it's been like 2 weeks of like kids being sick, so it's like getting in me here. So I'm sorry everybody about these coughs and frog in my throat. People have been talking about the frog in my throat for like a couple weeks. So I just don't see Quaithe being a second time traveler. I think it's an interesting idea, but I don't know how that would work. I've never like I don't see second time travelers in any of George R. R. Martin's time traveling stories. I don't know, like time travel is paradoxical enough. Doesn't it become even more paradoxical with the second time traveler? But with regards to Quaithe being a gardening tool, yes, I think it's a gardening tool. I in no way think that George R. Martin knew who Quaithe would be when he created the character. It was a mystery box, kind of a J.J. Abrams mystery box kind of situation where he just had no clue who she was. He was just gonna figure it out later. And then I do think when Dance with Dragons came along, he retroactively made Quaithe the person in charge, like the person that was doing Dany's visions and stuff like this. But it's I don't know if because like you actually like look at Quaithe. So Dany has a bunch of visions in the first book, in the very beginning of the second book. Then she meets Quaithe. Quaithe is just a mystical woman in that book. Like she doesn't do anything. She doesn't visit Dany at night. Anything like that. In fact, I'm trying to see here. Quaithe Okay, Quaithe does visit her in a storm of swords. But like that's about yeah. Or at least Dany thinks that she visits her in a storm of swords. But like there's nothing like metaphysical, mystical about Quaithe until the third book. So you essentially had all of these visions, and then she meets a mystical person. And then I guess starting in a storm of swords and then continuing on to a Dance with Dragons, like George connects Quaithe with the mystical visions, But he had no fucking clue. It's like he fully admits that George fully admits that he didn't even know that the three-eyed crow, that Bloodraven was going to be one of the people like in the tree related to sending visions to Bran. Like he didn't know that until later on. So yeah, he definitely does garden and mystery box. I'm sure he knows now. It's been 12 years of sitting around. He should have figured it out by now, but I don't think he knew anything about Quaithe. I mean, there's so little on her that she could honestly be anybody. She could be anybody. It doesn't even matter at this point. I finally figured out how Daenerys hatched those eggs. She walked a lot of miles with the Khalasar. Now, for those who don't know the joke here, he's talking about Pokemon Go. Okay, so it's like she walked all those miles, and then all of a sudden there's like, oh? Like no one ever. Everyone's like, how do you hatch these eggs? They're like 300-kilometer eggs, dude. They're like 300-kilometer eggs. You have to walk 300, maybe 500 kilometers with them, and then they finally act. She's got. So if you play Pokemon Go, you could get eggs, and then you walk a certain amount of kilometers, and then they hatch, and the Pokemon comes out. But like, yeah. Not asking about your personal life. Okay to share, but what's your general thoughts on monogamy, polygamy, open marriage, etc., jealousy? Um, Look, I don't know about every single person in the world. Like, obviously, I could never handle like uh polygamy or open marriage. Like, it's just not. That's not for me. Like, I'm a type of person that focuses on one person at a time. I've never been good at dating more than one person at a time. I like focusing on one person. I would feel jealous and uncomfortable if my significant other were dating somebody else. So, like, for me personally, it would never ever work. But maybe I'm just so traditional. Um, but I'd be too jealous and things like that. It was just would not work out. I also don't even understand, like, in a cohabitating sense. Um, the pro In a cohabitating sense, like being in a marriage and like when a decision is to be made, how does like would you get people teaming up? And would there be like a Game of Thrones in that sense? Like, one of the nice things about having an argument as a couple is that you both have equal footing, and so when resolution has to happen, the resolution is unanimous, because one person has to be convinced by the other. Um, and so, like, there's a lot of talk and there's a lot of dialogue, and you come to decisions, and you're getting everybody on board. It would be really rough if it were like a situation where there's three or four, because all of a sudden, like, one person might not be on board, and then people are but you're outvoted or something, which is a kind of a weird situation, right? Like, having a relationship devolve into democracy, versus like consensus. Um, I know some people that I'm often surprised how often I see couples like go into couples therapy, and sometimes it's the most rigid people, like, who are like, oh, I'll go into couples therapy, and I'm like, really? They were up for talking it out? They weren't really up for talking it out. They really thought that if they had an arbiter, the arbiter would side with them. Like, they're that petty that they're like, well, if I bring her in to couples counseling, like, the counselor is clearly going to side with me, and and she'll realize that she's crazy. Like, it's that kind of situation. And so I guess with a third person, I just feel like things would happen like that. Things would boil down to like two people teaming up on one person, and people being outgunned and stuff like that. I wouldn't like it. I don't know. I mean, I like the dynamic of two, but um, mm-mm-mm. But I don't know. If you can figure it out, all good for you. But I don't know. Um, with dragons, wouldn't Danny be able to make new Valerian steel weapons? No, because we have no idea like what goes into making Valyrian steel. We have no idea if it has anything to do with dragons. We have no idea. Um, Keep in mind that like Valyrian steel is based on this idea of Damascus steel. Um, Historically, that there was this supposed special forged steel called Damascus steel, and it has these swirls in it. And Valyrian steel is described the same way, having these like steel, having these like swirls, like wiki Damascus steel. And supposedly like they forgot how to do it, and it was like the technique is lost, and so they never did it again, and stuff like that. But is it really like, was Damascus steel like really that much better? It's whatever. It's not like it certainly wasn't like Valyrian steel. But with at least Damascus steel, I think it had to do with like some sort of ratio of carbon content and nanowires or something in there, like carbon nanotubes. But the idea that it has to do with like the magic of dragons breathing fire and their spells is not necessarily like something that's real. But it was just a technique, because they also like they don't know how to do the fused stone of Dragonstone and things like that. All these like lost technologies. Um, so, um, so it's maybe it depends on how like magical George wants to make Valyrian steel, um, versus just it being some weird um, carbon nanotubes. Now, keep in mind that in the books, we still don't know if Valyrian steel works against the others. Like we have some writing that says dragon steel, but we don't know. And like, what is it about it that like defeats the others? Is it just that it's super sharp and can like pierce through other armor? Because keep in mind that like obsidian can become really, really sharp. They would use them as scalpels in ancient times and stuff like that. And so it might just be that like nothing can pierce through the armor except for Valyrian steel, or maybe it's something to do with content, that there's some sort of odd, elemental blend to obsidian or Valyrian steel that reacts with the other's armor or something like that. But anyway, just having the dragons, she just wouldn't have the know-how. She wouldn't even know what to do. Have sent Elden Ring notes to inquiries email. Oh, thank you. I will take a look at that later. The Mideast would not have had the same had they been Christian, because colonialism wouldn't have hit them the same way, so religious radicalization wouldn't have happened. Kind of the West's fault. So this is people like to bring this up a lot, that like somehow like everything that goes wrong is the West's fault, and that like uh and that um really these problems are like karma or chickens coming home to roost and things like that. Um, that doesn't really describe things at all, like with the Middle East. So keep in mind that like the Middle East's like first colonialism was like the Umayyad Empire, right? Like, and that's a Middle Eastern colonialism, like colonialism of itself, like of itself. I mean, the different countries certainly didn't think they were unified, or and then you're talking about the Ottomans after that. And there was the extremism that happened under either the Umayyad or the Ottomans, like, had very little to do with like Westerners. Like Islamic jurisprudence that came out of a period, and it wasn't even early Islam. Early Islam, there was a lot of there was a fair bit of liberalism. There was a shift around 1000 AD where Islamic jurisprudence like came in and started reinterpreting things to various Islamic schools. And so they're like, if we're talking about like the ideas of radical Islam, but radical notions of like religion in the Middle East, they're not really linked to the West. So like Islamic, like, and this goes for like the Middle East at this point started producing both like religious law for each of the different sects. So if you live in, say, Egypt, even today, there are three governing bodies by which you, like, three governing legal systems that you're under. You're either under Sharia, which is Islamic law, or you're under canon law, that's Christian law, or if you're one of the, there's honestly like 36 Jews left in Egypt, but they have their own Jewish law that they are subject to in Egypt. But like Western colonialism of the Middle East didn't come until like the dissolution of the Ottoman Empire. And by then, like, you already had these legal entities in place. And then like the Westerners like didn't remove them. The only person that removed them was Ataturk in Turkey. He undid everything and and borrowed like Swiss legal law. So like Ataturk was like, fuck it. Like, we're getting rid of like Islamic jurisprudence. And then and so then things kind of continued on. Now, if you want to say that like the Islamic Revolution of 79 and like are like American and Russians like dealing with the Shah and stuff like that, it's not quite colonialism. Like, I understand that like there's Western interference that might have like caused the Islamic Revolution, and that eventually like led to an uptick in like conservative ideology in the Arab states. Like, maybe you could give that like some thought, but like none of that fundamentally like addresses the problem, which is religious law, whether it be Jewish, Christian, or Islamic, and this goes for Israel too, rules the Middle East. It rules the Middle East. You cannot marry who you want. You cannot pass on assets to who you want. Like, like all of these things are like in place. And in some countries, like the religious law, like is the criminal law as well. Most countries, it's the civil law is the religious law, but in places like Saudi, it's the criminal law as well. So none of that has to do with colonialism. Like, I understand it's really hip and cool to like blame everything on colonialism, but these were decisions made by Islamic jurisprudence, like well before like Westerners. Like, if now, was it colonialism's fault? Like, if you want to blame it on Umayyad and Ottoman colonialism, yeah, yes, like you can blame it on that colonialism, but it wasn't due to Western colonialism. You could maybe blame some notions and feelings on like Western interference, not colonialism, but I don't know if you can really say that like religious radicalization like was due to that. Like, it's built in, it's baked in, because it's baked in legal system. They need the Middle East, and Israel too. The whole Middle East needs to have their legal system thrown out the window. And because like, but I don't, we're never going to get that. But the entire legal system needs to be chucked in order for things to get better there. But you know, that's that. Could Longclaw actually be Dark's sister given to Jon by time traveling Bloodraven pays the Mormonts to not being an idiot but controlled? Well, if it is, it's not what Jeor Mormont thinks. Like Jeor Mormont thinks that the sword's been in his family for hundreds of years, like prior to Bloodraven existing. And so he at least believes Longclaw has been his family for 500 years. Now, how they got it 500 years ago is a real mystery. It's a weird time that some random like northern house would somehow get a hold of a Valyrian blade. I guess it's just after the Doom. Maybe like, I don't know, maybe somebody fled from the Doom or something like that happened. But it's odd to get it to be Longclaw. Like, I understand like people want like important blade to be important blade, and they're the same type of blade. But the characters in story have not said that the blade is like that. Like I say, Longclaw seems to be the blade nobody likes. Like, let's just give this shit away. No one wants it. No one wants it. Jeor leaves it behind. And then Jorah's like, nope, I don't want it. And then Mage Mormont's like, nope, I don't want it. Let's give it back to Jeor. And then Jorah's like, here you go, Jon. No one wants this piece of shit. So I don't know. It would be a weird story to be like somehow like, oh, we've got a hold of this Dark Sister. Crap. Like, let's change the blade like pummel so no one knows, you know, like somehow they come across it and then it gets passed down. I mean, I guess it could be something like that. I just don't know why House Mormont is so loosey goosey with that sword. Why they hate it. So, whoa, thoughts on the French? I find them lazy and vain. No, I have no idea what you're talking about on that. The French are like anybody else. I've met very hardworking French, very lazy French. I've met very vain French. I've been very slobby French. It's a big country of tens of millions of people. I've no, you know, where still, you know, I mean, my notions of what like is French is maybe different, but I don't know. I've never found them to be lazy or vain, in like compared to anybody else. They seem pretty hardworking. Now keep in mind, like, I don't know, like one of my best friends when I lived in Egypt was a French guy who would work long hours on oil rigs and natural gas rigs, and eventually moved to Texas, and his he was an insane runner and is now like a vegan, and like so he was like very dedicated, extreme, hyper focused individual and stuff. So I don't know. Granted, it's I've never had any generally speaking, I don't even know if I could like ever claim like any entire group of people as like lazy or vain. Like, I find hard workers everywhere, and I find lazy people everywhere, and I find like vain people everywhere, and I find you know, so I don't know if there's any like cultural or state aspect to it too much. Is dawn just a big glass candle? So we talked about this a bit. I forget if it was last stream or the stream before, but someone mentioned the idea that rather than a big glass candle, it's the reverse. That it's a localized glass candle. That in the wielder's hands, he can then read the thoughts of who he's fighting, and then know what the person is doing before they do, and get a better idea, and be able to parry and fight. It's a really fascinating idea. I think it's something that George probably didn't think of. I think it's like I think it's a really cool idea. I think it works. I think it's something that might be put into fanfic because it's so cool. But I don't necessarily think that George thought of it. The only real clue on what dawn is, outside of ice and fire, is George wrote a story for wild cards. In which it takes place in Egypt, and yeah. So there's a wild cards book. I'm gonna like tell you the plot, and you guys are gonna like roll your eyes. There's a wild cards book where a reality show is a reality show about the wild card mutants, like, is being filmed in Egypt, and so they follow like these wild cards like to Egypt, and there's this reality show being filmed, but then at the same time there's this guy who's trying to take over Egypt who calls himself the Jinn, and he's getting really powerful. And as someone who lived in the Middle East for a while, I'm like, no one would ever call themselves the Jinn. Like, no one would ever call themselves the Jinn and be like, input, like, find like national support. Like, it's like calling yourself the demon. Like, no one would do it. But it's so, but these people aren't, most people don't, George R. Martin and the others don't know much about the Middle East. So there's a character in it named, and if you open up, I'm going to pull this picture up because it's very important to know what I'm talking about. There's this character. Give me this. Come on, give me the picture. Oh, here it is. One of the wild cards is this guy. And so he might look a little familiar, right? So this guy is named Lohengrin, and he's an idealistic young ace. Ace, when they say ace, they mean a mutant that didn't become mutated. So in the Wildcards universe, Wildcards virus gets released, and you either, like, if you have a genetic component, you receive superpowers. However, 9 out of 10 times you become like gross and deformed, and then like 1 out of 10 times you become an ace, meaning like you can master your ability and you're essentially a superhero. So so in the world there's like ghettos filled with these mutant people, and the aces like go around like saving the world. So originally Lohengrin was from an ace from Germany, quickly learned for most aces. He was more concerned with making commercials and endorsing products than really affecting the change. But then he left America. Let's see. He's out drinking with Jonathan Hive. Lohengrin presents. He reactivated his ace heritage by fusing with a powerful wild carder named Sekhmet. Trying to figure out his sword, because he's got this sword. What's his power? Okay, Lohengrin can materialize a protective energy that manifests as a suit of glowing white armor, and a variety of different weapons, including a sword, a battle axe, and a flail. It's unknown what exactly Lohengrin's armor and weapons are made of, though the German scientist who studied Lohengrin says that it's perhaps ectoplasmic energy. Lohengrin simply calls it ghost steel. So the idea is that like Lohengrin is this like idealistic, like ancient knightly idea with like knightly virtues and stuff like this, which is the same as like the idea of Arthur Dane. He's got this white sword. He's this white knight. This character, by the way, is one of the few that was created by George R. Martin. So like George R. Martin only created like 3 wild cards. He created the Turtle, he created Xavier Desmond, and he created him. So in this story, you're like, oh, that guy like he seems a lot like Arthur Dane with 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 Dawn, right? You've got an idealistic, like classic knight with this big glowing white sword made out of a mysterious substance that no one knows what it is. In this character, case, it's like somewhat protective and energy related or something like that. So George's ideas might have more to do with that like there's some sort of like energy like getting contained in the sword or something like that. But I do think it being a glass candle is a more interesting idea. But that's the only clue I've ever come across on like what Dawn could be, is that character from the name of the book is Inside Straight is the name of the book. And it's not a good book. Though George's story is fine. It's funny. His little story in it is a bit funny, but and Lohengrin is like a ridiculous character. Cersei must act swiftly and ruthlessly to counter coup for control in RK. She has the king. Who else will Elgards obey when you play the game? No. Who else will the Lannister guards obey? There's a lot with like thinking about Cersei and like control and how she's going to get it back in King's Landing. I mean, I definitely think like Tyene and Lady Nym will play a role in how she's going to get power, leaning into the Dornish alliance and things like that, and conceding things to the Dornish, perhaps allowing Dornish law. The Dornish have a lot they can hold over her, but they're one of the few allies, ironically, that she has left. That the fact that her child is engaged to a Dornishman. So I do think like whatever counter coup or whatever means of survival that she's going to take is going to involve the Sand Snakes. Now, as opposed to like who would Lannister guards follow in King's Landing? Well, yeah, I think any Lannister guard is going to be loyal to her. They're not going to follow Lancel. But the question is like how many Lannister guards are left? We don't really know. Like we don't know who's loyal for the crown. How many Tyrell guards are there? And then the Gold Cloaks themselves. Who are the Gold Cloaks? Now the Gold Cloaks are they're still run by Adam Marbrand, right? And he's a Westerman. Right? I'm trying to think here. No. Adam Marbrand is no longer. He was formerly. I'm trying to think who's currently the. Yeah, so in A Dance with Dragons, Mace Tyrell adds 100 Highgarden men to the city watch. Sir Adam leaves, and in the place, she appoints Osfried Kettleblack, who's removed by the small council, and in his place, Humphrey Waters. Humphrey Waters. We have no idea about like who the hell Humphrey Waters is. So I'm just assuming Humphrey Waters is loyal to Janis Slint. I have no idea. Like that's a Jesus. Humphrey Waters. I mean, he could be anybody, right? Because any bastard born in the Crownlands or the Narrow Sea is going to be a Waters. He could be loyal to anybody. George essentially just freaking didn't know, so we put somebody that we could have no idea about their loyalty to. So it's in many ways it's about who Humphrey Waters chooses to like, and you know, is he going to allow people to take control of the city, and you know, is he going to let Cersei out? You know, I mean, I kind of see the long term thing is like that Cersei's going to flee back to Casterly Rock as Aegon takes control. Like, yeah, there might be this fight between the Lannisters and the Tyrells over King's Landing, but it's got to be over soon. It's got to be over quickly because Aegon's going to take the capital. So I don't see it being too relevant. Like, I understand that like the Tyrell Lannister fight seems really interesting and like who's going to be loyal to whom, but it kind of all doesn't matter because Aegon's right there. It kind of gets back to like Stannis. Like, is Stannis going to defeat Ramsay? It kind of doesn't matter because the Weeper and the others are right there, and they're just going to take over instead. But yeah, I guess the real thing, we got to start figuring out who Humphrey Waters is, because that's a pretty important element. Janis Slint, man. Janis Slint still has control over everything. Alar Deem still has control over everything. How much will the God's Eye, Green Men, play in the final act? How much is Bloodraven instead of time traveling Bran? Is Ashara Howland? Jesus. Is Ashara with Howland? George R. R. Martin likes being married. Well, I don't think George's married life is any different from his unmarried life. There was absolutely no change in his life at all from going from unmarried to married. But on the first thing, God's Eye and the Green Men, I mean, I think that is if not the final act, the ending to the final act. You know, like, I think obviously, like, we have the clue in Daenerys' story in A Clash of Kings that things are going to end up at the Trident. She has a vision. I'll read it here. Hold on. Where's that vision? Is it Melt? I'm trying to find the is it Rhaegar? She thinks she's Rhaegar? Ugh. Really wanted to I thought she had a vision of a river drying up, and thought she had a vision of rivers drying up and like her being in armor like Rhaegar. Why am I not getting it? Boop-a-doop-a-doo. Okay. It's in... here we go. I was looking at the wrong thing. Daenerys 3... That night she dreamed... This is Daenerys 3, A Storm of Swords. I, for some reason, thought it was in Clash of Kings. That night she dreamt that she was Rhaegar, riding to the Trident, that she was mounted on a dragon, not a horse. When she saw the usurper's rebel host across the river, they were armored all in ice, but she bathed them in the dragon fire, and they melted away like dew, and turned the Trident into a torrent. Some small part of her knew she was dreaming, but another part exulted. And I think there's something else as well about like. I think there's still something in Clash that I'm forgetting, but she specifically has this vision of going to the Trident, you know. And now, granted, maybe you're like, oh, well, that's just her story of in the Dance of the Dragons against Aegon, and then she's going to head north or something. But nonetheless, there's like some battle that she's having. Like she's going to have, she's showing up to the Trident at some point. Um, and so I do think that's kind of a last act. I mean, it says here they're armored all in ice, as if like she's fighting the others or something at the Trident. And it does seem like, why not have that be the end of the story? So I mean, I think that it's like that's the final mystery of the story, is who's on the God's Eye. But you know, knowing George and how he likes things to be ambiguous, like I kind of have my perfect ending to the story, which is like Sansa gets in a boat and the boatman takes her to the God's Eye, and you kind of get the notion that the boatman is Howland Reed, and then you know, in the final act, she like meets the Green Men, and somehow there's resolution there on the island, you know. But could be played out in many different ways. But I think it's yes. I don't think we're ever going to find out definitively what's going on or who they are, but I think they're going to play a big role. Then how much is Bloodraven instead of time traveling Bran? I mean, that's the big thing about like blended consciousness, is that we don't really know. We don't know how much of Bloodraven is even left, you know. In there. But so I don't necessarily think it matters. I mean, I think time traveling Bran is very distinct from Bloodraven, but like Bloodraven and the children, I don't know. Man, I'm way behind. I realize like I'm like in conversation we were in like an hour and a half ago. Best masculinity metaphor in media is dudes think they're Don Draper, but they're really Pete Campbell. Yeah. What do you think the exchange rate for X inches of height to 1 inch of genitals would be, so that the average man would be happy with either option? uh, um, this is the problem, is that like what men believe. It's like in truth, like these like I think in truth women care more about height than they do penis size. But men think it's all about penis size because they've been watching all of this porn where they're like, oh my gosh, as long as I got a huge dick, like women will just like fall for me. And they're like, really? You don't understand a thing about sex, you know? Like, um, but I think I don't know if 1 inch, like most people would be willing to give 1 inch off of their penis. That's a lot. That's a lot. I suppose if like some dude is like 5'5" and he's getting like 6 inches more in height, and he's only giving up half an inch to his penis, I think he might be able to willing to do that. But people are pretty sensitive about giving up things with regards to their genitalia. Um, let's see here. If Benjen turns up, won't John have to execute him as a deserter? Can't justify being on a mission that long. Must be south of the wall somewhere, or on Skagos. Rickon died, took over Shaggy Dog. Um. Well, I don't know about that. That's a funny idea though. I mean, as long as you stay north of the wall, I guess. It depends what he's up to. If he's been fighting wildlings the whole time or discovering something great, you know, he's all good. I mean, Mance is seen as a deserter, but you don't have being away for a long time is fine as long as you're on a mission. Um, like even the recruiters for the Night's Watch like live for years and years south of the wall, but they can justify it. So I think, you know, he'd have a reason. Like, I was fighting somebody, I was seeking something out, I was seeking out some knowledge or something. I mean, if he's just like living on Skagos with a wife and kid, you know, that's one thing. But that's another mystery box that I don't even think George has like come up with a good answer for. Where's Benjen and what he's been up to? Um, which is why, like, I think the show went with cold hands. What better answer is there? But that's not it, you know. Who would your champion be if I had to go up against Gregor? You'd want somebody like Oberyn, right? You'd want somebody fast who could move around. Um, I mean, Jamie Lannister with a good hand. Loras, you know, I'd want somebody fast, um, who can like work around. The big thing, like the big problem that Gregor has is that he's got this huge distance, right? That he's wielding his unfair advantage is essentially, um, he's so large that he can hold a great handed two sword like a double, um, long sword, two handed long sword with one hand, and so he's got this incredible range, um, that that makes it just unfair. Gregor, like, other than the fact that he's got that range, isn't necessarily a great fighter, but he's essentially cheating, by having that range. So the way you undo it is if you have a spearman. I think Oberyn is a really great choice because you can have a spear that makes up for that length, and then you can you can counteract it, right, and just be fast and stab the guy from afar. So I think if you're not going to have Oberyn, I would want another person that wields a spear that's just as good, like somebody like Obara. Um, um, how do you make up for like, uh, what it's like, length and sword fighting? Yeah, that's how the big thing is, like making up for reach. Um, so the big thing is that like height is really important in sword fighting because height like creates reach. Um, Longer your arms are, further your reach, and then the weapon that you have is super long. So, um, so you can have skill to overcome it, but that reach is it's just insane. So what you're gonna need is a really Oberyn is almost perfect as the guy to kill Gregor because he's got a spear which is longer than the than the sword, and he's fast and he's highly skilled and things like this. Oberyn's like perfect. But if not Oberyn, another spear wielder who is like really good. So maybe Obara might be a pretty good choice, against Gregor, just because you're trying to make up for that reach. Um, I'm trying to think if anybody else could really do it. And that's pretty much I think that's pretty much it. I think it's Obara. Obara is the only one who is alive in story. Um, George R. R. Martin presents so many wonderful images. Flower Boy Tommen and Davos reading by the light of magic swords are a few of mine. What are some of yours? I'm trying to think of like so good like like imagery moments. Uh I was always like very interested in the the eastern cities quite a bit. Like I love the idea of this like red waste, and then out of the red waste this like magical city of Karth, like with its three walls and like all sorts of crazy people inside. I understand that it's like very much a Wizard of Oz kind of thing, right? Like Emerald City kind of idea. I definitely like that. I definitely thought that his imagery of Astapor in Quentin's perspective and it being like horrible and like these pyramids and these burning mounds and paths and like Kago corpse killer like being brought out and being rammed against the kind of foe unsullied, or I mean the against the new Gis he has behind him, the foe unsullied. I think that imagery is pretty neat. I like that a lot. Um, the just because it's just so like it's just so strange and exotic and unusual. I think it's like all the stuff that's like unusual, like out of a dream kind of stuff is what I sort of like. A lot of people like this is one of the reasons like I don't like the Dothraki Sea or based off rock too much because it's like, well, I can imagine people in tents in a grasslands like that's not fantastical. Like I like the idea of some fantastical place. Um, Arya like being in Harrenhal with all of, like the creepy melted towers like calling out to her in the wind. I think is very kind of beautiful, creepy imagery. Um, Even like descriptions of Moat Cailin are very creepy as well, and stuff like that. Those are some of my favorite. I think Storm's End is a very kind of beautiful idea as well. Like this raging storm with this big castle on a cliff, kind of idea. But um, at least in this kind of grand epic story. Um, but I don't know. But like on a smaller scale, I'm not sure. I'm not sure. I have to think about that. Ever read H.G. Wells' The Time Machine? Thoughts? No, I've seen all of the Time Machine movies. I've never actually read Time Machine. But I mean, I if the movie follows like the story at all, I think it's I don't know somewhat interesting that in the future like he's like I think the meta story is kind of more interesting, like the fact that this guy H.G. Wells like thought that in the future mankind would descend into this situation where we just like be called in to slaughter like cows, um, is kind of interesting. But that's how the movie goes. Is that Yeah, I guess he wrote it in 1895. So it's interesting to have this like post-apocalyptic dying Earth idea before like nuclear weapons or any of that. Like, like this is like 50 years before nuclear weapons. And the guy has this like bleak dying Earth like wasteland kind of view of the future. Um oh, there's a lot more. I'm sorry. The sounds like the story is not very similar to the movie at all. In the movie, he essentially just goes to the future and humanity seems pretty comfortable, but it turns out they're getting called in to this cave to be slaughtered like cows for the Morlocks. But in the book it seems like the Morlocks like take his time machine and Oh yeah, the derelict museum where he finds. I guess that's in the Guy Pearce version where he finds the derelict museum. Um, and then the Morlocks use the time machine. Jeez, this is very different than any of the versions. And he views like the end of time by going out to like 30 million years in the future. Jeez. All right, very different story. I've not read that, and it was not put to screen in any version. um I'm 25 tomorrow, and dating at this age sucks. Everyone wants to be non-monogamous. Um I'll come back to this. Hold on, but so I would say that like I definitely had that belief as well when I was 25, and that somehow the world out there was like everyone was like no one was looking for anything serious. I just kept running into like, but I think it's just that there's plenty of people that want to be monogamous or want to be in a relationship. It's just that I think that how you're meeting them is perhaps you're taking from a pool that is selecting for non-monogamous people. You know, like if you're on a dating app, um, then you're finding people that are like jumping from people to person who have like a million options, who always are looking over their shoulders on the next big thing. And even though dating apps, like all of my friends like met their significant others through dating apps or dating websites, like it's, I kind of feel that you're selecting for people that are not actually like interested in finding anybody. And so there are specific like dating sites that focus on like relationships that like select for that, or you know you find people in environments that that you try to meet people in different environments. So like I say, like one of there are lots of places to actually meet like people besides like dating apps and bars, which is probably selecting for people that don't actually want to be in relationships, that just want to meet new people constantly. But yeah, like, let's say you volunteer um, at some like aid organization or whatever, you're going to run into a lot of different people, a lot of young people, and they're probably going to be a little different in mindset. Or even if you join like a softball league, co-ed softball league, you're going to be running into different types of people. Um, and so it may be that you're just like finding the wrong pools. Because I can tell you that like literally there's a million people. There's just like so many people that want to be monogamous like at all times. Like I know that you get the impression that like that's not the case, but it's just wrong. Like I for a long time, like because I was in the same situation where I'm just like, why is every woman horrible? Like why? And it's like, no, it was just like I was just running into a bad string. Like that was it. That was it. Why are they all this one way? No, it's just that you're running into a bad string, or you're in a pool yourself, like finding the wrong people. Like um because that's the big thing is like, say you have a bag of marbles and half the marbles are white and half the marbles are black. Okay. And say you stick your hand in and you pull out a black marble, you pull out a black marble, you stick your hand in, you pull out a black marble. Um, should your immediate conclusion be that the bag is actually only filled with black marbles? No. Like something else is going on. Like the bag wasn't shaken up. You're somehow only selecting like the black marbles. Like, like that's literally what's going on. I'm telling you that like there's actually a diverse group of people there, but somehow your method of selection is only running into a certain type. And it has less to do with the population and more to do with your selecting techniques. And so what I say is just like mix up your selecting techniques. And rather than saying like everybody's the same, because they're not. They're definitely not. Definitely not. Would it be accurate to say George R. R. Martin and J.J. Abrams have a similar storytelling style with their mystery boxes and gardening styles? I think so. I think that both are not very successful in there. Well, J.J. Abrams has not been very successful with his mystery box technique, has he? He like whether it be Lost or whether it be Star Wars, right? He creates a mystery box and then he doesn't actually have a good, satisfying answer of what's getting big inside. He's very good at roping people in, but then when he opens that mystery box, it's all disappointing. Though other people are better at it, and other people, like, if they are better at like keeping the mystery a mystery and things like that. I think Damon Lindelof is excellent at having the mystery box and keeping the mystery box a mystery even till the end, and like letting it be okay, But George R. R. Martin, yeah, his other gardening techniques, I guess, worked when the story was smaller. But he's never done this before, right? He's never had like such a big box. Like, I'm just thinking of his other books where, did he bring together the story elements? Yeah, he brought them in fine. His short stories, did he bring those elements in fine? Yeah, but it was less. They have fewer of these boxes. But man, I guess the mystery box idea is like, it's so perilous. It's so perilous. The fact that like J.J. Abrams has a freaking TED Talk about how great the mystery box is, and then everybody like knows him as the guy that like fucked up Lost and Star Wars. It's just kind of crazy that the mystery box is just like a cautionary tale, really. You better come up with a really fucking good idea if you're gonna have that mystery box. Oh man. But yeah, I guess it's similar. It might be George's problem here. Is the Ninth Fort important anymore? Did George prune that from his story along with the Black Gate and won't revisit it anymore? That's a good point. That's a good question. I think that so this question is getting into in George's like original drafts. He had more background on the Night Fort. And there was more about Stannis restoring the Night Fort, and it was clearly going to be something that was focused on in Dance with Dragons, and people are like moving to the Night Fort because they was trying to create these parallels of the Night King and things like that. And then he just kind of realized that this wasn't working and it wasn't happening, and so like a lot of the Night Fort stuff was cut from A Dance with Dragons, and so just because he couldn't move the characters there. He just couldn't do it in the amount of time. And so I think that I think that might be, I think that that's accurate. That I don't think the Night Fort is really going to be playing much an important role later on. Because I'm trying to think, did they even, he still want it to be a seat? Man. Let's see here. He still talks about restoring the Night Fort. as his seat. They're still talking about it. And then Awful Yarwick is still trying to restore it. And he says it's kind of restored by the end of the book. And that Selyse wants to go to the Night Fort. And that's it. But then Havoc happens. So, I mean, I guess you could have, like, if Stannis returns or something, people going to the Night Fort, and finding something interesting there. But man, there's just not much time. There's just not much time at all. Because it's supposed to be an uncomfortable place still. I mean, at the end of the book, they actually say that, like, Selyse was not in great haste to go there. But it is clear that there was a lot of pruning of the Night Fort, and I just don't know if there's much time. Like, why would you move all these characters there? What's the point? What's the point when there's just so little time left? Because even getting Stannis back to the Wall and then moving him to the Night Fort, just for that parallel, for what? You know, I don't know. I suppose. I mean, it makes things easier if a lot of action is happening in the Night Fort. It makes things easier for, like, Bran to sneak through Castle Black to get south of the Wall, I suppose, without running into a lot of people. But yeah. I mean, George has to finish a book before we revisit anything. But will Comet be a Vulcan in the fanfic or the sci-fi? I don't know. The comet is kind of gone. I don't know how they could, you know, like in the fanfic we keep mentioning it a lot just as, like, a thing, but I don't know if the comet being a Vulcan, maybe at the very end or something, and some sort of weird message about this idea that, so Comet, for those that don't know, Comet being a Vulcan, in George R. R. Martin has a story called Night Flyers, in which there's this large animal that's passing through space via telekinesis. And when it passes by worlds, people's telepathic and telekinetic abilities, like, become enhanced a little bit. So when it passes by Earth, the idea is that Jesus did various miracles or something, because he had, like, a little bit of influence from the Vulcan. And so it's like a somewhat borrowed idea in Ice and Fire that, like, oh, this comet comes and then these dragons can hatch. Like, there's something magical or telepathic, you know, going on when the comet is near. And then now the comet's going away, or it's activating. Man, the glass candles are activating and dragons are hatching and activating, all because it's like comet came close. And so, like, they're fundamentally doing the same thing, right? Like, whether you say, like, enhancing magic, enhancing telepathy or telekinesis, it's the same fucking thing, right? So, like, the function of the Vulcan and the function of the comet, whether literal or metaphorical, maybe the comet did nothing. Maybe the goggles do nothing. But people you're certainly led to believe that. And so in that sense, like, it's they're kind of the same thing. So the joke became, like, Comet is a Vulcan, you know, like, it was a Vulcan the whole time, you know. So I don't know, maybe some hints at that, but that's way down the line. George R. R. Martin regrets killing Jon. Fire White bad for Ark. So Carmine we did a follow-up podcast on the George R. R. Martin regrets thing, that we'll be probably posting next week, this coming week. But I don't know if Jon regrets, like, you know, he wants his little Jesus. It's people were talking about Jon coming back as Jesus character for a long time. It seems so obvious, and based on everything that's been there, right? The establishment of Cat coming back, um, Jon just being that Jesus character. All characters having that moment of death coming back, you know, Neo or whatever. Um, they all have to like die and then come back. And so it's, and then I imagine George's original vision is Jon is this Jesus character. Um, he's the one that's supposed to unite all of the people and come back from the dead and unite all the religions, and then he just fucking falls flat in his face and does none of that, which is probably George's original plan, which played out somewhat in the show. Though in the show, Jon fell flat as like the uniter, but he played it down quite a bit. Like you didn't really have all of these peoples or all of these religions like united behind Jon. You just had Varys, and then Varys is killed. And I guess built into Dany's paranoia, which didn't really go anywhere either. So. Mr. Carmine, how goes it?
Real quick. I just wanted to say, I'm gonna get off right after I say this. Real quick, that discussion we did, that follow-up discussion on George R. Martin regrets killing characters.
Yeah,
That's a Patreon exclusive. So be sure to check out Patreon with patreon.com/. What's your Patreon? Is it Sweet Robin 9000 or is it Preston Jacobs? So yeah, me and Preston, we have a great. Did you come up with a great idea for Jamie being like the regent? That was you, right?
Oh,
Or
that
was
was
that
somebody
me?
suggesting it. I don't think it was me originally. Or maybe it came like while we were talking about it, like
While we were
freewheeling.
riffing?
That
Yeah.
like Jamie's the regent, but not really the regent. So they have they have Jenna come in as his as the
No,
stand-in.
the small council rules in Jamie's name because Jamie is absent as the regent.
I see. I see.
How did you forget? This is like a whole one
Right. I mean,
of
that
the
would allow the
highlights.
Tyrells to rule. It's a lot shittier. But yeah,
Mm-hmm.
you'd think you'd
Okay,
want. Yeah. Okay.
I just wanted to top in here real quick. Sorry to Cassidy coach
Oh,
that,
no, no,
but
no,
yeah.
no. Please, please. How's it going otherwise?
Oh, it's going. I still have my bullshit setup. I just need to build my new desk that came and buy a chair that's not like a stool, like bar stool I'm sitting on. So
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. Um, I think that's so Carmine, he
Uh-oh.
is actually very much a you know
Huh?
how like in the 50s there were people like obsessed with cars and having like
What?
a really nice car and talking about like tech, like
Oh,
like
before you go into this, is your echo cancellation thing on?
let me check. Let me check here. Yeah, yeah, it's on.
Okay, cool. Continue. 50s car porn star.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
people were like really obsessed with cars and knowing the ins and outs of cars. And then this kind of became like computers later on. Except that there's nothing really sexy about computers, but nonetheless, like dudes are super like into like their computer setups, and like you're very much one of those people. You're like, oh, I got this thing, I got this new mic, I got this like graphics card. It's gonna be fucking great. I'm gonna be able to fucking game. It's gonna be fucking baller. You know,
I
it's
spent so fucking long looking up like what's the best TV for what I want, what's
yeah.
the best like chair that's comfortable. Yes,
You
that
you
is.
need you need to watch. There's a video called Anti Don. Like, hey, do you know about the comedy group Anti Donna? They're from Australia.
Yes, I know about them.
There's one called they just posted this week called When Men Talk, and
Hmm.
it's fucking brilliant. It's fucking brilliant. So the one dude's mowing his lawn, and a guy comes out and he's like, "Oh yeah, is that a 24? 26. Ah, I was thinking about a 26. I had a 24. Oh, you got a
What is this
26.
accent?
Oh, yeah. Is that a 5? Oh, no, no. It goes up to 8. Like, it's so fucking brilliant. It's so fucking brilliant. And it just goes on for like 20 minutes of them just talking numbers. Oh my God, you've got the 112. No. 88. Like, no. Like,
That's funny.
oh man.
Oh
So,
yeah. Let me get out of here so you can get back to the super chats. I will be posting some clips of it, but and I'll be sending the 2 podcasts we did. Once again, Patreon exclusive. Patreon.com/Preston Jacobs. Bye.
now I've got to figure out what else to post this week if it's going to be on Patreon on my regular channel. Where do you think Bran came from? I think Bran is a creature of Varys. And it's based on very little, but I'll tell you my reasoning for it. So in A Game of Thrones, a Yoren comes to Ned and tells them that Cat has kidnapped Tyrion, and this is like big news from the Crossroads Inn, right? So Yoren does this, but however, and he races in. He like races in. They talk about his horse being lathered. Like he gets on his horse at the inn at the Crossroads and races to King's Landing in order to tell Ned that Cat has kidnapped Tyrion. However, Arya has already heard about it because she was underground with the dragon skull and sees Varys and Illyrio walk by talking about how Cat has kidnapped Tyrion. So, now granted, maybe someone else jumped on their horse and was even faster than Yoren. Or Yoren is a creature of Illyrio. Now, there's another thing that makes me think that Yoren is a creature of Varys, and that is when Gendry is given to the Night's Watch. He's given to Yoren, and Yoren talks about how he was like given to him and told to take this person to the Watch, and then he says, "Never mind who told me to do this." And then we find out that like Varys was making arrangements to deal with Robert's bastard. So those are both revealed in Clash. And so you put those two together, Varys gave Gendry to Yoren. So we have like two different connections that show that Yoren is probably Varys' creature. Not much, but it's something. So if we accept that Yoren is Varys' creature, then you kind of say, well, okay, like what else is going on at the Crossroads? Like who's there? Well, Bran is there. Bran views everything and is like, well, I'm going to follow Tyrion all the way to the freaking Eyrie and then be his sword in a trial by combat, and then befriend him and come bring him all the way back and then present him Shay. And so like Shay then plays into like the manipulation of Tyrion so much like in the coming book that you can kind of say, well, if Shay is like Varys' creature, then shouldn't and Bran is responsible for bringing Shay, and Bran was mysteriously at the end of the Crossroads where Yoren was, and stuff like this. It's weak. I'm not saying it's a very strong theory, but Bran fits in very well with being one of Varys' creatures. And then you fast forward to how important that's going to be in the Winds of Winter. Bran now has control over Stokeworth land, which is the surrounding lands of King's Landing, for the Aegon invasion, which is like Varys' cause. Now, that requires like a lot of that. Admittedly, this requires like George having planned all of this fucking shit and like all of these things like making sense versus George just writing random shit, like, which is quite possible that he's just writing random shit. But you know, it creates a nice little story that like Varys was actually like very much had his like tabs on all of these characters, and you know, wanted Bran and Shay and everyone to manipulate Tyrion, and was like playing him the entire time. So I think that Bran, in my opinion, is a Varys plant, but um, he might just be, you know, random shit. But I'm not saying it's the strongest evidence, but there's evidence. Cersei and the Lannisters can take the Red Keep in minutes, but Kevin was right. Outside the Red Keep, her power is busted. She needs new power. She'll turn to the Faith, born again as their pious, penitent Queen of Terror. I'm trying to think how well that would go over. So one of the things about the Faith in general is that the random sparrow on the street is upset. They're upset with the security situation in the Seven Kingdoms. They're upset that they were abused, that as small folk, they were abused by the Lannisters, you know, and their creatures, the brave companions, the Mountains Men, Amory Lorch. And no one did anything to protect them. And so they came to King's Landing complaining about this lack of security. So it's hard. I'm not saying it's impossible, but it's difficult to push up Cersei as this symbol of resolving like the Sparrow's problems. Like this, you know, that was their number one problem, was like safety and security. Now, granted, that's just the small folk, and maybe the High Sparrow is just manipulating them and benefiting off them, and the High Sparrow has his own ideas of what he can do. But she shouldn't be seen as a very good character to the average Sparrow, like just in the sense that like, one, the Lannisters failed to provide security. Two, the Lannisters were actually the cause of all of this insecurity, that they caused all of the violence and abuse. So that has it going against it. Now, could Cersei like call for the Faith militant to like protect her? The thing is, the Faith militant, how many are there really? The Faith militant is going to be a bunch of like, she so far we know that, okay, for the trained people, we know the names of two of them. You've got Theobald and Lancel. Everybody else are just peasants, right? The stars and such. So I mean, logically speaking, I mean, no, thematically that the Faith militant has to play a good role later, but logically speaking, right, like I say, this like Waters character who runs the City Watch is like much more important than Cersei, you know. So we shall see about that. But maybe pious penitent queen. It's possible. Anything's possible. But King's Landing does have to fall to Aegon fairly soon, and Aegon has to take control fairly soon. So she could pull that off for half a book, maybe. I don't know. Okay. Does mind control lessen other characters' intrigue? It does. However, it's still George R. R. Martin's calling card. Like if you take a story like Sand Kings specifically, And Sand Kings is a story about a psychopath who, the psychopath, absolute psychopath, is the main character. And it's a very intriguing, strange, creepy story because the psychopath is the main character. But also, his mind is getting manipulated by an ant colony telepathically as well. And so, like, is George in that story trying to have it both ways? Like, how can you get into the human heart in conflict, and have that be a theme when your mind is getting controlled by aliens? By well, it shouldn't. Like, all of a sudden, it's like, oh, are you, you're whose fault is it? I think I've brought up this before about the Pharaoh in the story of Moses. We're going to bring it back over to the Passover story. The weird thing about the Bible is that it actually says that God hardened the Pharaoh's heart. And so, like, who is the villain in that story? If God is the one that actually hardened the Pharaoh's heart, then it was God that was preventing the Pharaoh from letting the Jews go and be freed. And therefore, it was his fault. So who's Moses like fighting against? He's fighting against God's own actions. So yeah, I agree. Like, mind control does lessen character intrigue, but this is also just a huge part of, like, George R. Martin's stories, like the influence. It's and he like, he plays this all the time. Like, I think about poor Viserys. Like, is Viserys nuts because he had this crazy life, running from city to city and becoming paranoid, having everything taken from him and being the beggar king? Or is he crazy because he has the Targaryen taint, like Barristan said he did? Or is it both? You're having, or maybe it's just for us to debate, like, where one thing ends and the other thing begins. But yeah, I personally agree that it muddies themes, and that I think mind control is a bit much. But George loves it. He fucking loves the mind control. Mind control up the wazoo. Like, isn't it important? Like you could take the Jaime story, for example. Isn't it rather important that, like, Jaime chooses to go back and save Brienne? Like, isn't that a moment of personal growth for Jaime? Like, when he turns around and goes back to Harrenhal and jumps in the bear pit. Like, isn't that, like, a huge moment for, like, Jaime? But at the same time, he was sleeping on a weirwood stump as the moon was shining on his head, and he had a prophetic dream. Like, oh geez, so Jaime wasn't responsible for his own personal growth? Like, it was actually mind control? Like, yeah, George is having it both ways. Like, he's trying to have this, like, incredible story about a man changing, but it's also about mind control. But free will, where are all the Valyrian steel-tipped spears? It's a good fucking point, because really, you're really, like, wasting your time with all these swords. In fact, you're wasting your time. Like, I mean, granted, they were made at a time when, like, the Valyrians could just make them constantly, so why even worry about it? But, like, when you're gonna remelt something down, like, why wouldn't it be in a spear form? It's just a much more efficient use of metal. We actually get into this a bit when I did the John Con chapters. In the late Middle Ages, Europe discovered that the spear was superior to the sword, and that that the Swiss pike square, was, like, just a much better, like, battle tactic than, like, throwing people out there with swords, on horses. That you could take a bunch of people with minimal training and a bunch of spears and just fucking murder everybody else. That man, what a great system. And granted, it didn't live that long because eventually the gun comes not soon after this. But had there been no gunpowder, like the pike square probably would have continued on for a long time as the dominant form of warfare in Europe, and it would have just been spear, 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 spear. And I want to say in China they discovered the spear was kind of superior to the sword, long before. I don't know. We get this obsession with the sword, but the spear is. I mean, it's longer. Like it's longer. Like, why wouldn't you use a spear? You need less metal. But But you're right. You're totally right that like there should be, considering that there is a Valyrian steel Arak in the story. You should have some Valyrian steel tipped spears, especially if you could reforge the stuff. Like, why wouldn't you grab a dagger and reforge it into a Valyrian steel tipped spear? You're right. Thoughts on the UFO Congress stuff? I think it's a bit silly. I think it's a waste of time. Yeah, thoughts on this. Look, I'm not one for government conspiracies. I think that like once you stop and like think things through, the they go away pretty quick. Like God, freaking Joe Rogan last week. Last week Joe Rogan pushed on he was talking to that funny comedian who's the he was talking to totally forgetting I don't know why I'm obsessed with like who he was talking to, but he was talking to Jim Gaffigan. So Joe Rogan was talking to Jim Gaffigan, and oh my God, like just watching how stupid Joe Rogan is, and like I saw the clip and I was just like, oh my gosh, this guy's so dumb. He's so dumb. But essentially he said like, okay, the FBI is known for using tactics to instigate protest mobs into like violent actions to discredit them. And he brings up like the FBI trying to disrupt anti-WTO protests like 20 years ago. Which again, probably unproven. I don't even want to get into like whether that happened or not. But like, even if that were the case, like logically saying like just because an organization used a tactic in situation A doesn't mean they're going to 20 years later use situation 2B. So Joe Rogan is making this argument that the FBI was at January 6th and that they were instigating the protesters and induced them to attack the Capitol, which, it's not too different than the whole like Antifa did it all, but now it's the deep state did it all, right? Of course, like the problem with all of the January 6th was an inside job like things is when you stop and think about it, you're like, well, wait a minute. Like Trump ordered everybody to go to the Capitol. Like, how did Antifa or the FBI or any of these people know that Trump was going to order these people to the Capitol? And once you kind of ask that simple question, you're like, oh, right. Oh, yeah, no, none of that makes sense. And Joe Rogan's a freaking idiot. On top of the fact that like the government's very bad at organizing anything and is very bad at keeping secrets. Like the government is so freaking like, I don't think you understand like how bureaucratic and ridiculous the government can be. Like, so bringing it back to the UFOs. Like, say at some point a UFO is discovered. Like, the government would, like, you get these government bureaucrats coming in there. Like, they would immediately would not know what to do. So they would call their supervisors, and then their supervisors would call their supervisors. And then when government doesn't know what to do in situations, they pull in more people because they're like, oh crap. Like, I don't know how to handle this. So I'm just gonna. So then they have a bigger meeting at a bigger meeting. Like, you never have a situation in government where you're like, oh crap, this happened. I'm not gonna tell anybody. Like, we're gonna keep this a secret. No, it's always like, well, let's have another meeting at a higher level, and then another higher level meeting, and then this person's brought in. Let's bring in counsel. Let's bring in the lawyers. And then it just gets, and then it pretty much everyone in the chain knows. And then they all start gossiping. And they start gossiping. And everybody has an incentive to gossip. One, because like gossiping's fun, but two, like the media loves to hear about that. And you like, you could become famous if you're like the government agent that reveals that like UFOs are real. You can get a book deal. Someone will pay you to be on their show. So you have a like, government conspiracies require so many people, but with any conspiracy, there's an economic incentive to break the conspiracy. This gets into economics too with cartels. And there's always an economic incentive to break the cartel. So, like when people talk about like, oh, like this one whistleblower is like saying that there might be some stuff being hidden to get with regards to UFOs. Like, where are all the other ones? Like, where's the documents? Like, how did this happen? Like, why wasn't this leaked to the media many times before? It never is, and so it's I think from X-Files or something, people get this idea that the government has this incredible ability to keep secrets and to do things efficiently and effectively, and like can control narratives. The government can't do that. Like, it can't do it. Like, we couldn't stop, like, government couldn't stop 9/11. I know people think, oh, 9/11 inside job, but think about that. Like, how incompetent the government is at that point. You have all these people like in America getting visas to learn to fly planes, and a few of the situations there were reports like, oh god, the guys didn't want to land, and meanwhile you get stories about like, oh, Osama bin Laden is planning something inside America, and everybody couldn't connect the dots because government is just this big bureaucracy. It's not efficient. Like, I just don't think the government would be able to manage a cover up. Like, they just wouldn't be able to do it. Like, they couldn't do it. There's too many people. So no, I don't think there's UFOs. I think this is a big waste of time. I don't think that there's anything to it. This also gets into like, the constant CIA jokes in here. Like, oh, the CIA did this and the CIA did that. And they're like, what do you think the CIA is capable of doing? You forget that the CIA is a bunch of like numbnuts who have like never successfully achieved anything in the history of their organization. And then you could be like, oh, well, maybe they achieved stuff, but it's all a secret. Oh, really? Well, they've fucking done nothing. Like, it's just a bunch of fuck ups after fuck ups for generations. They've never successfully done anything positive unless you like go back to maybe like fixing an Italian election in the 50s or something. Like, it's government's really, really inefficient doing anything other than cutting social security checks. And Carmine's back. Hello.
I am so fucking sorry. Can I just say one thing about this?
What's that?
If you don't, because it says someone in the chat. I'm not calling out this guy, but he said, guy ET. He says Joe says some stupid stuff, but I like his idea. Most of the time, it's better to talk about a subject than to shut people down and disagree. So that it takes it back to like the whole thing about like talking about COVID and all these like different remedies for COVID. There's like a fallacy here of asking questions. which is not what like the right wingers are doing or Rogan is doing. The point of like just asking questions, that whole method, is to ask questions that cannot be possibly answered by normal people. Because when someone asks a question and the answer is, I don't know, that is meant to, one, create doubt in the person's knowledge on the topic, and two, make it seem like the person asking the question knows something the other doesn't. It creates this gotcha moment. And I fucking hate it. And also, talking about these topics, do we really have to? Like, what does Rogan know? He doesn't know shit.
He doesn't know shit. And like, I mean, there's a lot of topics that are harmful. The Gilbert Gottfried has this genius routine, where he says, Gilbert Gottfried has this incredible routine where he goes up on stage and he says, look, I know you guys have been talking about this a lot, and we're all talking about the rumor that Bob Saget raped and killed a woman in 1990. But let me tell you, there is no truth to the rumor that Bob Saget raped and murdered a woman in 1990. And, you know, a lot of people are like, think that, and he goes on for like 15 minutes, just repeating it over and over again. I know Bob Saget, and he would never rape and murder a woman in 1990. You just keep going and going, and you realize that like just by bringing it up, like bringing something up lends credence to the idea being like, you know, okay, or like somehow real or true. And that's the problem with Joe Rogan. Joe Rogan doesn't have very good critical thinking skills at all. Like, I understand like this idea, well, we're just talking about a topic. Well, if you're talking about a topic without any critical thinking of being able to like understand what's true, like I say, like it's so simple that that January 6th couldn't be an inside job because Trump ordered everybody to the Capitol. Like, it shuts down like everything. Like, how can you not like immediately think that? But to like bring up the idea that the FBI would send agents to a protest to induce people to attack the Capitol to stop a vote count, and be like, well, we're just bringing up ideas and just talking about stuff. Like, that's fucking bonkers, dude. Like, that is just ridiculously irresponsible. It's ridiculously irresponsible. You know, like new ideas are great. New ideas are great. Everybody likes new ideas. That's of course a positive good. But you have to also like bring forth good like ideas with a critical mindset. To like immediately to like, and to judge and like talk about whether this idea is good. You know, like it can't just be like, well, you know, it's, you know, let's just talk about the idea of murdering children. Like, let's murder some 10-year-olds, Carmine. Let's just murder them. Yeah, really, that's an interesting thought. You know, we're just
FBI
talking,
listening on this. I do not know this man.
Like, but like immediately be like, well, that's against the law and immoral. So like immediately, like you'd immediately have critical thinking to be like, no, for X, Y, Z reasons. You have to be able to like you have to have critical thinking when bringing up ideas. Like, it's just not about like spitballing and throwing shit at a wall. Like immediately be like, why doesn't this make sense? So that's my you know.
Did you listen to the Jim Gaffigan interview?
I did.
I actually did as well.
Like, just Jim Gaffigan is just sitting there shocked because he's like, crap, I can't, like, he invites me on this show and it's like such a huge boom to my career to be on this show. So he's like, trying not to like piss off Joe, but like trying to ask questions like, well, but you think that the FBI would induce people to attack the Capitol? Like, it's crazy.
What's funny is, so I'm assuming the FBI is doing all this to take down Trump, but what about that one time the FBI purposely fucked over Hillary Clinton's campaign right before the 26?
Right.
I guess it was different. FBI.
The idea that also that like the FBI is somehow one person. Like, the FBI is filled with literally thousands of agents, okay, who all have their own minds and their own political ideologies, okay? So imagine imagine for a second that there's some supervisor or let's say higher up, and he calls somebody and he's like, okay, like, yeah, I got this plan. We're gonna induce like protesters to attack the Capitol to discredit Trump. Like, but he already lost the election. Doesn't matter, man. He might run again in 4 years. We gotta shut it down. This seems sketchy and weird, but okay. Like, all right, you bring in a team of people that are like politically like on your side, but you're not allowed to ask about people's political backgrounds in government. Like, won't they be like weirded out by that? Just do it. Okay. All right, fine. Okay. Also, you got to bring in HR because they're going to be like putting on like overtime hours, and danger pay hours. So you've got to get your like management section who like signs off on like leave to be on board too. Oh, really? The administrative people? Can't we go? No. Oh, so you want me to convince a bunch of my guys who like aren't who like to not put in overtime or danger pay to go into a protest and like induce people to attack the Capitol? Like, once you even break it down to like, how would you even pay these people? Like, it just, a whole thing falls apart. Like bureaucratically.
You pay them using George Soros's money, funneling it through Hunter Biden's laptop, of course.
Right. Like, it's such a fundamental, like how are you even paying them? Like, how would that work? Like, like people don't understand, like, when I go on a trip to do an audit, like the number of people that have to approve like that process, and then for me to get reimbursed for things, like how many people look at like the receipts and everything for stuff that's like, this is like anything more than $75. Like they're like, what is this? Be like, yeah, that was that was a taxi. You're like, but that taxi was like $100. Yeah, well, we went all the way from like Dubai to Abu Dhabi. And they'll be like, wait, but why was it and you're like, you get this stuff and you're like, oh my god, like it's $100, dude. Like the amount of time we're on the phone here, like the fact that like they could somehow think that even like you could get a bunch of government bureaucrats to put like to go to the Capitol to induce somebody to do something that they're not even trained for. Like, how am I going to induce somebody? Do I have training for that? What training course? How is this done? I don't know. I don't know how this is done. Okay, so you're sending me to the Capitol to induce somebody to attack it. You don't know how to do that. Like, I'm trained in like, I'm an FBI agent. I'm trained in like interrogation techniques. I'm not trained in for like protest eruptions, like just all sorts of crazy stuff like this. Like, these people like keeping UFOs a secret. Like, that person that's like, wait, you want me to come in on a Saturday and like pick up an alien corpse for free? Like, cause I want some overtime. Then somebody's going to be like, well, why was this guy approved for overtime? Oh, well, he had to do some stuff on a Saturday. Part of what project? Just file it under like miscellaneous training. Like what train? Like this is how things would go. Like, they'd be like, what training? Like, what are you talking about? Because I have to file this. I have to file this under a certain project number. Because our funds are earmarked for like certain activities. Like, we just all fall fucking apart. This taste of like government life that like I joke all the time, like watching 24, how none of that would fucking work. Like Jack Bauer's like, fuck, I've got to get downtown I've got to fly to LA to stop a nuclear weapon. All right, let's go into the computer system to try to buy the ticket. And they'd be like, the computer system's down. It's undergoing maintenance. We'll be back up Monday. Fuck. Let me do this. Let me pass this through to HR. What? Tim's on AWS, alternate work schedule, where they don't work Fridays. Fuck. Who does this go to instead? Like, Linda, she's at lunch. Oh no, like I need this approved now. Like you would never you'd never be able to get anything done. Nothing. No, 24 would just be the freaking like ridiculous. Like we would, the city would get nuked. Nothing would happen. Oh, anyway, I'm sick, no energy. Night Fort is hella important. Don't be silly. Stannis prophecy, Blackgate, and the fucking lore in place. Yeah, maybe. But like I say, it's just like how much time do we got? How much time do we have? Like I understand that, like, you know, you want to make that Night's King connection and like what was going on with the Night's Watch and the others in the original and what agreements were going on, babies and Night and Blackgate mouths, and link it all back to Craster. And I get it. There's a lot of story that needs to be answered, and Night Fort is the place to answer those questions. So I admit that, like, yeah, it'd be nice to get back to the Night Fort to answer all of that. And have Stannis be a new Night King or whatever. But is it, getting that time. Because realistically, like, okay, like you spend some time with Melisandre, dealing with the aftermath of the Night's Watch rebellion. Maybe you get Jon resurrected again or something. It doesn't matter. You get everybody heading back to the Night Fort by what? Like earliest mid-book? Because let me tell you, resolving all of the battles is already half of Winds of Winter. Like, it's already half of Winds of Winter. Like, with the fanfic, we're approaching the 1/4 point of the story. And I have not dealt with, like, the Battle of Ice or anything in the North. So so you deal with all the battles, and that's halfway point of the story. And then maybe you can get into some night fort stuff near the end, right before an others invasion. It's gotta happen fast. George mind controlled people to care about a book that'll never come out. Fair enough. Do you think Jon will meet his brother? I recently saw some convincing foreshadowing in one of his dreams. Are you talking about, like, assuming Jon is the child of Rhaegar and Lyanna, that he would meet his half brother Aegon? They're very far from each other on the map. It would take he would have to jump on a ship and head all the way back down, and then it would have to be in, like, a last book or something. But that would be a tough one. But I'm wondering about Jon's dreams. Yeah, which ones he could meet a brother in. You have to tell me, like, what foreshadowing might point to that, because that's interesting. Swords are never used in battle. They're shit against armor. Blunt weapons are mostly used. Yeah, I understand that, like, maces and warhammers and stuff like that were better, just to, like, shock people. I think swords were used, like, if you're in a situation where you've got a few knights who are, like, well trained, and they're going in and just slaughtering untrained people, like, right and left with swords. You could get something like that. There's also the idea of, like, shield, sword, like in the old Roman times. But the problem in the Middle Ages had such a boom in good weaponry that you had so many things to choose from. In RGS, to mind control, does George think people change? Oh, in regards to mind control, just people think people change. The he does. I mean, I'm trying to think of like these stories where he does think people change. He does. In fact, most of his books do have some sort of like existential crisis moment where a character like analyzes everything. Um, like take Dying of the Light. Dying of the Light has a whole chapter where the main character Dirk just like has this existential crisis and is like by himself, like thinking about the universe. And it's like it's an important moment. Um, and that has no supernatural element to that existential crisis. And it's the same with like I think there's some similar stuff in Fever Dream, like completely not supernatural, um, where people change. He also has characters that don't change, even though they ought to, like in Fever Dream with like Sour Billy and stuff like that. But and then other times he has characters who like change, but it's with the help of something supernatural going in. Like in Armageddon Rag, the main character receives like prophetic dreams, and he makes some big decisional changes based on the prophetic dreams. And in Ice and Fire, it seems to be the same way. So, I think he does think people change. It's just I have to say it's a lot easier to bring your existential crisis to life through a prophetic dream, through a prophetic fever dream, than to just have the person freaking out in their head. It's a lot easier. It's more colorful. People are reading into imagery and stuff like that. Than to have the person like then to in a very painstaking way like write an emotional scene where the person is like having a conversation in their mind and going over things and coming to a new um, decision. Like it's just maybe it's just laziness that people use the prophetic fever dream as like a moment because it's a lot harder to write like somebody's changing their mind. you know um I'm even thinking like Under Siege. Under Siege is the time travel story where like a person changes their mind because another person has like entered their brain, and the two of them like decide to change. So he does both. It's just a lot easier with the supernatural. Like it's a lot easier to just like make it big and have imagery and stuff like that to it. Um, do you believe that each side gets a dragon? Danny keeps one, Euron uses horn to get one, and the others get one. I believe that each side gets a dragon, but I don't believe in the way you're talking about. I think that like Victarion captures a dragon. I think someone captures a dragon and delivers it to Aegon, and Danny keeps one, and then later maybe one of those dragons might make it to the others. Um, I don't think the horn is anything, um, and you know somehow that dragon, and I think Danny's going to lose both of. I think she's going to have one dragon. I think she's going to that Aegon is going to get a dragon somehow, and I think that Quentin is the perfect tool to bring that dragon to Aegon, but it could be somebody else. But I think that like, yeah, you're going to split up the dragons. Um, but Danny having two is just a little weird, you know, like where she's going to have adventures with Drogon and then come back to Slaver's Bay and just the dragon's just going to be sitting there waiting for her. I mean, I just so yeah, I think every side might get one, but not, I don't think it necessarily needs to be any magic horn, or anything like that. But I think definitely Aegon's going to have one, and Danny's going to have one for a second Dance of the Dragons, and maybe eventually one of those dragons is going to end up in the hands of the others. I don't know. Cersei as repentant over the Sparrow religious terror may play into Aegon's hands. Rescuing King's Landing from the Sparrows gives him cause to curb End Faith power. It's true. I'm trying to think like what um I'm gonna get to the uh rescuing King's Landing from the Sparrows gives him cause to curb the faith power. Um if the public, I mean, is the pub? I don't know who the public is behind. Doesn't the public like the faith? Don't they like the faith of the seven? Do they have any reason to not like the faith of the seven? Yet, I mean, the faith of the seven is, I think they're providing food for them and such like stuff like that. So, and this goes for most like extreme religious organizations. Is the most extreme religious organizations will win over the masses by providing like basic social functions that the state is not providing. And so I don't know if the public would be like, what would make the public turn against the Sparrows is the question, because the public seems to like the Sparrows right now. And now I'm trying to think about like, historically about what happened to the movement, and it's more about like Maegor the Cruel going around like smiting them out. And if that's, if somebody needs to do that, is Aegon gonna play that role, or is Cersei gonna play that role of like smiting the religious? But I don't know if Dornish law, which I see playing a role, is going to interfere with the faith. Like with the faith probably wouldn't be into Dornish law too much, just because they're probably pretty sexist too. There's a lot of things juggling around, like realizing how complicated it is and how much needs to get done in one book. Like assuming Dany comes back at the end of the Winds of Winter to fight Aegon, and to have the Dream of Spring just be the rumble between Dany and Aegon, and the rumble between the others and people. You've got to get all these things resolved in the Winds of Winter. It's just a lot of fucking shit, like getting rid of the faith. So, somebody's got to do it, but and somehow deal with Dornish law and all of this kind of stuff, and I just don't know if the Sand Snakes, for example, would play well with the High Sparrow and things like that. But I don't know. We'll see. A lot going on. Now Joe Rogan is absolutely correct when he states that, though, Preston. Every FBI anti-terrorist bust in the past 20 years has been their own homegrown people. Well, this is a conflating two very different things. Okay. An FBI terrorist, and keep in mind, like what Rogan was talking about was people showing up to a protest and inducing the people at the protest to lash out. Now, what you're talking about with sting operations is FBI people like who going to, say, a mosque, like an American Muslim guy who works for the FBI, like going to a mosque and being like, "Hey guys, let's do a terrorist attack," and the other guys in the mosque being like, "Oh, okay, maybe I'll be onto that," and then planning this entire thing, and then right before the thing goes, them arresting everybody and being like, "Haha," and it being like entrapment. That's very, very different. Like one is a long investigative process, which is what the FBI does. They're investigators. One is a long investigative process over the course of years. And one is a bunch of dudes showing up with like, I don't know, like showing up randomly and inducing people to like become violent. They're completely, utterly different things. There's nothing comparable at all to them, to like an investigative sting operation and showing up to a protest and trying to get people to act violently. There's nothing. There's no similarity at all. I mean, the FBI killed Martin Luther King. No, FBI Martin Luther King was killed by a bunch of rednecks, right? I mean, this is a joke, right? But I understand that like people pull this stuff all the time. Like, um, he was killed by um, who killed James Earl Ray. James Earl Ray was I'm trying to think. He recanted. So James Earl Ray confessed and then recanted his confession. But he was a he was a nutso like white supremacist. Um, but yeah, there's nothing. I'm trying to think like his they don't even have very much about his life. He was just like he was in the army and discharged for ineptitude and lack of adaptability. Like he was just kind of a nuts dude. Um, didn't the CIA kill JFK or somebody? That's the other thing. Like if the FBI is like very legally restricted from operating inside the United States, so like it would be very difficult for um, a project like that to happen with with without somebody making a fuss in HR. What happened to Aesop? It's all I'm fucking talking about is A Song of Ice and Fire. Jesus. Jesus. Um, More similarities between One Piece and A Song of Ice and Fire. Black blades are Valyrian steel. Fishmen are squishers. Alabasta is Dorn. Blackbeard is Euron. Um, Alabasta. Um, I'm trying to think about all these kind of things like Alabasta. Huh. The thing is like George uses the same sort of like um, archetype characters in stuff. So it's even when I was making jokes about or making similarities between like the Urge Tree and the Werewood, like it's not like he's the only person to use like a big tree for you know a big soul sucking tree to be in his stuff. I mean, like Avatar uses the big tree, right? Um, and I think there's a big tree in Elder's game, isn't there? I want to say, but um, there's something in that. Tree started to. I haven't read Elder's like Ender's Game, so I've got to I put in Elder's Game, Ender's Game. There's like a big tree in that, right? The there's like an alien species native to Lusitania who oh my gosh, this is like so very similar to And Seven Times Never Kill Man. Um but yeah, they have like second life and third lives by like they enter their tree and things like that. And this was written, when was Ender's Game written? You know, like um 85 to all the way up until, I guess he was writing it for the sequels, which happened in 86, 91, 96. So, I mean, you know, all these ideas are just used over and over again. So, yes, like Euron is the classic pirate, you know, various, they always have like some sort of like Southern Spanish like kingdom. You know, there are these fishmen, creature from the Black Lagoon kind of things, you know. So it's not that George is being original at all in any of this. Um, um, Spicy break down the Trump indictments. I mean, Trump's been Trump's gonna be in trouble, man. The he's, I mean, if anything, he's just gonna be caught up in legal limbo forever. So, um, it's in that sense, it's gonna be uh, it's gonna be horrible for him. He can't run, like he won't be able to run for president because he's gonna be constantly visiting court for various things. And so he's in this kind of situation where he'll, he can't lose the primaries, but he can't win the election, things like that. Um, but yeah, the he'll try to delay all of the stuff as much as he can. Delay it until after his death is his probably hope. Just keep delay forever. Considering he's 77 years old, right? So he just has to delay things for, you know, if he can delay things for a good 10 years, he'll die of natural causes before any justice will happen to him. So, but um, but yeah, the guy is a horrible traitor and tried to overthrow democracy, and he deserves to be in prison. So it's um, that's really the end to it. The end to it. Oh, they have a where? What's the what's? Hold on, let me try to. Batco. Here we go. Um, in Time Traveling Bran, you mentioned that in Under Siege and other George R. R. Martin stories, timelines are hard to change, but that Bran can't affect events prior to his conception. Yeah. Um. so I so the how he does it in Under Siege is that the only way that Under Siege is able to function is that the character jumps back in time as a consciousness, changes the world, and then never goes back because his timeline is erased and overwritten. So it's the only way he's able to succeed in what he's doing. Now, time traveling Bran could conceivably doing the same thing. Like he somehow jumps back in time and then lives and then jumps back in time again and then lives and then jumps back in time and then lives. But then what the hell is regular Bran's like function at that point? If you're just dealing with time traveling Bran's like loop, where's regular Bran come in? Like regular Bran needs to be part of this. So, you know, it could be that time traveling Bran is going and snowballing brands, like he's collecting thousands of brands. Or it could be that each time traveling Bran is the new Bran, and the old time traveling Bran disappears, and that time traveling Bran is from the last iteration, and Bran will become a new time traveling Bran if he wants to, or maybe not. You know, so he's either jumping in the snowball, or he's supposed to become the time traveling Bran, and then he'd go back in time, convince another Bran to become the time traveling Bran, and go on in a loop like that. But in all of these situations, like the timeline is hard to change, but if it changes, it disappears. It's gone. That's for Under Siege, yeah. For I'm trying to think if there's some in its other time traveling stories, things are a bit weird. Like one guy, in one For a Single Yesterday, a guy jumps back in time, and then there might be changes in the current timeline around the characters that happen. I suppose the best way to think about it is the Bruce Willis time travel movie with Looper, where the time travel events happen around them. But in all of these kind of situations, like I can't imagine time traveling Bran going before his own birth and changing things, because then he'd stop his own conception. And so like in Under Siege, yeah, the dude definitely stops his own conception. Like, but it doesn't matter because he's metaphysical now, merged with the brain of another person. And yeah, and the other one, Unsound Variation, has to do with branching timelines. And the main character never time travels himself. He refuses to, and stuff like that. So it's so like I say, I think what a lot of people don't like about the interpretations is they like the idea that Bran is somehow Bran the Builder and Bran the Shipwright, and all of these people were Bran, and that time traveling Bran is affecting all of the events from beginning of time. But I don't know if I answered the question you're getting at, but I'm trying. Hopefully, I talked around it enough that you got a satisfying answer. How dark will the Winds of Winter get? And oh, hold on a second. I'm ahead of stuff. I don't want to skip anybody here. Hold on. Oh my gosh. Okay. Oh gosh, so much. Here we go. I think this is where I was. This one gets asked twice, so I'll get there. Will Winds of Winter be super dark? How dark will it get? And later on, there's going to be one that says, how dark will it be, and will the fanfic be that dark? I think Winds of Winter will be very, very dark if it were ever to come out. And like that's just the evidence of the Aaron sample chapter and Mercy both being like incredibly dark. And I'm talking about like Aaron like chapter dealing with just like very detailed descriptions of like pain and suffering, and as well as bringing up issues of being raped by one's brother, and then the Mercy chapter dealing with weird pedophilia themes and stuff like that they're all really super dark. Okay. And going by that, George would probably make things like even darker. Like just keep going overboard. And George can be dark, man. He can be dark. Night Flyers is freaking dark. Meat House Man is really dark. George he can go super dark. Not that Vargo Hoat like eating himself isn't already pretty fucking dark. But this actually lends a problem with like me at the fanfic, is that I don't think I like as bold as I can be in the fanfic. And keep in mind that like the boldness I'm being in the fanfic so far is like keeping Quentin alive and making Ario Hotep bigger than he is and stuff like that, keeping John dead. Those are some bold moves. But there's so much pushback from people when I go like super dark or super edgy or super bold that it's very difficult for people to accept like most of it. Like even when we reconstructed the Victorian chapter, which was based on George's account, people were like, well, I think you went a little too far there. I was like, no, but this is like what, like, this is what we heard George did. Like, they're like, this is really fucking weird. Like, so it's hard. It's hard to escalate things past, like, when you're doing fanfic, to escalate things past what, like, George has done, to, like, because then all of a sudden you're not in his style anymore. Well, his style is escalation, but, so in that sense, it's very limiting. So I don't actually believe I can match the amount of darkness that George would have, because George has the freedom to do whatever he wants, and it's George. Okay, like, we are constantly trying to mimic George, which means we only really have, like, the type of thing we think George could do. George is free to do anything he wants, and it's him. So in that sense, we can't be as dark as George. Like, George will be darker. So in that, it's a sad thing, but we can't be as bold and bring as many surprises as George could, because someone would be like, George would never do that. It's like the Star Wars expanded universe. I always, like, one of my big problems with it, and keep my Carmine was a huge fan of Star Wars expanded universe, extended universe. But they could never kill off anybody. They couldn't kill off Luke. They can't kill off Lando. They can't kill off Han. They can't kill off Leia. They couldn't kill anybody. I think maybe there was a book where they killed off Chewie, and it was a big deal. Like, oh my gosh, you killed Chewie. Because meanwhile, if you're George Lucas, you can fucking do whatever you want. Just think, like, how much pushback Rian Johnson got for, like, portraying Luke Skywalker the way he did. Like, how dare you do this to George's, like, ideas. George Lucas's ideas. Like, can't, you see Bound. There's, like, handcuffs, when it's not yours. It's like renting versus owning. Stannis burns, trying to wield the real Lightbringer. I need more than a sword from you, John 9. Was this let's get this. So my so this line, I need more than a sword from you, is John says to Stannis, my sword is pledged to the Night's Watch, Your Grace. And Stannis says, I need more than a sword from you. Meaning, he needs John's as a body to be the Lord of Winterfell, to unite the wildlings in the north together to, like, fight for him. This idea. Now, when Stannis, like, does he burn his hand when he tries to pull out Lightbringer from the fires on the beaches of Dragonstone? But I'm trying to think, like, is this getting into the idea that somehow you're saying that, like, if Stannis burns trying to hold Lightbringer, you'd need somebody with, like, some degree of fireproofness? The thing is, like, didn't Jon burn his hand too? Like, Jon's not fireproof in any sense. So I'm trying to think of if you're saying if Jon could represent the sword, or if Jon represents Nissa or something, or what. I mean, it's a lot of, like, convoluted themes here in general with Azor Ahai and Nissa and stuff. But okay, gotta get through this. Okay, how did the Mormonts get lemons for his beer at the Wall? I get that Ned is a great lord and can affect some of Sansa's lemon cakes, but the watch, for the watch, it's an extravagant expense. Red Door really in the north? No. So the idea is that the Night's Watch does have incomes. So it has the gift and the new gift. And from the new gift and the gift, they grow crops, and the stewards farm those crops, and they get coin. And with that coin, they can trade with either of the wildlings, which they do, or from East Watch, they can have various luxuries like shipped up. And so, the lemon, he gets some lemon in his tea. How many lemons does he get? Like, you can probably cut up a lemon, keep it for like 3 or 4 days, cut up, have a bunch of like for his teas, uses 1 lemon every week. Gets 50 lemons a year. Like get a bushel shipped up from Dorne. It's not really that extravagant of an expense, because it's not like we're cooking lemon cakes and stuff like that. He's just getting occasional lemon for his tea. So unfortunately, it's just like you can't get too much from it, because it's such a small amount of lemon, kind of stuff. George R. Martin is a radical lesbian. Jeez, these things. Let's see here. What's the rush in the fanfic? Rushing reeks of D&D. The story can't be done in 2 normal books. We know we haven't finished Act 2 yet. It's more in the sense of like, it's rushing in the sense of like what I can possibly achieve in my lifetime, and like a reasonable time for like people here. So I mean, say we're able to produce 1/4 of the Winds of Winter in 2 years. The Winds of Winter gets produced in 8 years. Like, that's a lot of time here, like, in like 6 more years, like, how old am I going to be? And then we have to worry about the Dream of Spring. And like, so it's more about the realistically, like, how can we finish a story? And it's like, when people are like, oh, don't rush yourself, let it be as big as you want. Well, I'm mortal too. Like, I'm not going to have this channel forever. I'm not going to live forever. I think, like, in a case of rushing it, like, we're talking about finishing a story in 14 years, or finishing the Winds of Winter in like 6 more years. And that's like being optimistic. So in that sense, like, yeah, I gotta rush it some. Gotta bring things together. And let me tell you, like, I've mapped out the Winds of Winter on how I would do it. Rushing it, like it's still like not fast enough. There's just so much that needs to be resolved, and so many plot threads that need to come together, that it's like, it's such a furious kind of thing. Sometime in a little bit, I'm probably going to do a video on when we get to the quarter point, like when we get to what I call the 100,000, the 110,000 point, which is the like where the story is and how much more needs to be resolved just to like get to a certain point, the number of word count and what's possible in the book. To just the goal is just, like, generally speaking, to bring Dany and all the characters back to Westeros and to begin the Others' invasion by the end of the Winds of Winter. Like, get Bran out of his tree and south of the wall. Get everybody south of the wall. Get all characters south of the wall and back from Essos by by the end of the Winds of Winter. Which means, gotta resolve Stone Snake. Gotta resolve Benjen. Gotta resolve Weeper. Gotta resolve Bran. Gotta resolve Craster's Keep. Gotta resolve Hardhome. all that got to resolve Skagos. All that needs to, and the others. That all needs to be pulled south. With Dany, got to resolve Vastoth Rock, got to resolve Karth, got to resolve Slaver's Bay, got to resolve whatever's going on in Volantis. You got to pull Victarion back, got to get Dany back, get Tyrion back. Like, all that, and get Arya back. That's probably one of the easier ones. Like, all those plot lines need to come. Just pulling that off, like within the Winds of Winter, is pretty challenging. And then from that point, you can go further and bring everybody to the God's Eye for the last book. But man, it's hard. It's hard. But so yeah, I mean, if I were 22 or something, and do this forever. But it's just it's tough. It's tough. Anyway, we talked about this a bit. How dark will Winds of Winter be, and how dark will the fanfic be? It's just it's tough to go too much further. I mean, the fact that we did the Victarion sample chapter extension was as dark as it. We'll try to shove some dark stuff in here and there. I've got some ideas on various stuff, but it's kind of got to get linked into what George is able to do. Are you doing Hold the Door in the fanfic? Sauropods are like geckos. Sound like geckos. But with regards to Hold the Door, yes. Sauropods are these big the Brontosaurus. If Brontosaurus is real. Are you doing Hold the Door in the fanfic? We are, but already when we're the Bran, if you've read the Bran plan, and I have Bran 1, the Winds of Winter is pretty much written. It needs some more editing and some cleaning up, but it's in a very strong place right now. We are gonna do Hold the Door, but I think it's going to have a different feel completely from the show, and there's some neat things that I really like about what we've done with the Bran chapter and what's going to happen. But yeah, it's he's holding the door. He's definitely holding the door. There's definitely time travel and holding the door, but I think it's going to have a different feel than and I don't want to spoil anything, but there's a moment that came to me that I was quite proud of, that I included in there, where I was like, oh, this is quite beautiful, and a cool change at the moment. But anyway, Hamlet or Macbeth, thoughts on more V for Vendetta? Hamlet is a much more complicated story than Macbeth. I like Hamlet quite a bit. It's Shakespeare's longest. It's the one he spent the most time on. It's the most complicated. I think there's a lot more there. Not that Macbeth doesn't have a lot in it, but I think there's more complexity in Hamlet, or maybe just society in general has placed more complexity on Hamlet, and that we read more into it. But it's more fun now because there's so much more to see with Hamlet. Thoughts on Moore? Moore is one of those guys where you as a person in interviews and everything, he's insufferable. But the art he creates is great. It's great. And once he lays down his arguments, in story, it's hard to dispute. It's hard to dispute them. Oh my gosh, the fact that he, like I say, he has a comic book where he shows a birth, and he got so much crap, and he's like, you got, the society is hypocritical because of I show a freaking birth, and I do blood and guts all day long and no one cares, but I show a woman giving birth, and showing like a newborn come out of a woman, and all of a sudden I'm labeled a pornographer and stuff like that. And he's like, oh, you got a point there. So I like his work a lot. I think he's in person, he's just a fucking he's a grumpy old man and kind of insufferable to hang out with. But like all of his work is freaking great. It's hard for me to come up with something I don't of that he wrote that I don't like. But so yeah, I'm a big fan. But he's all of his adaptations are have not come out perfect, and he wanted them all to be perfect. But and he was cheated out of a lot of money early on, and all of this is true. But he became like a very grumpy, bitter old man. Preston, are you worried about AI taking over jobs? Not really. Human beings are creative and come up with new things pretty quickly. It's like anything else. It's like any other step that society takes. There's always new things for people to do. And, I just I'm actually at the point where I'm like, I'm actually in a reverse situation where I'm like, how did it get to the point where technology and AI has been making us work harder? That's actually the situation that I'm fearful of. How did we get in a situation where people have too much work to do? Because we were supposed to be like, you watch the Jetsons. Everybody's got all this free time. You only need to work. Like, George Jetson only needs to press a button a few times a day. Like, what happened to technology, like making our lives easier? That went away. Technology's done the reverse, right? Unions fought for us to work like 40 hours a week. Finish work, you go home, you enjoy yourself. And now it's like, no, you've got Zoom and teleworking. So you can work from home. You can work after hours. Oh, you got this is on your phone. Now when I send you an email after hours, you have to respond to that email when you're having dinner with your family and afterwards, Oh, it's a snow day? You can work from home. Yeah, that's the great thing about remote work. We never have to take a break. You can just keep working all fucking day long. All day. Somehow that became society. So I'm fearful of quite the opposite. When people are like, oh, are you fearful of AI taking over jobs? I'm fearful that we just keep working too much. Like, I want AI to take over some fucking jobs. I want us to be like, you know what? Let's take it back. How about we work 30-hour weeks? Like, that I think is progress. When we're all working less. And I understand that like this goes against GDP growth and all this kind of shit, all this bonkers shit. Like, oh my gosh, unemployment rate. I want not unemployment where people are searching for work. I want less employment. I want people to be working 30 hours a week and enjoying life and that being progress. I want people retiring earlier, not later. I want people that's what I want. Less work, not more. Like, how did this get where I want AI to take over our fucking jobs so we can fucking relax. That's what we need. But that the system is all about like one guy trying to capture all of the money and have AI do all of the jobs and him giving no money out to the workers. That's the situation. Aside from Elden Ring, I'm pretty sure Bloodborne is inspired by Fever Dream and Lovecraft. Great game. A story, by the way, 100% recommend. Yeah, I mean, let me look up Bloodborne for a second. Oh, it's the same guy. Yeah, so Hidetaki Miyazaki is the guy that did Elden Ring. And before that, he did Bloodborne. And his favorite George R. R. Martin book is Fever Dream. And it's not Ice and Fire, it's Fever Dream. And he is super into Lovecraft. So the fact that there is stuff in Bloodborne with Fever Dream and Lovecraft is not surprising. Like, he's talked about this openly in interviews. That Fever Dream, like, he loved Fever Dream and its like take on vampires and atmosphere and everything. Okay, getting there. Almost to the end. I've been having so much fun in chat. I haven't listened to Preston for 10 minutes. Don't tell him, okay? I mean, this is the great... I mean, I think the thing about the live streams is that there's many things going on to make it entertaining. And so it's, it's interesting for people. Because if it's just me entertaining you for 3.5 hours, I'm gonna fail. I've seen a lot of Preston hate on the A Song of Ice and Fire sub lately, probably because they think the fanfic is blasphemy. How do you deal with that? Has there been more lately? So, here's the thing. There's two different issues here. The one is this like Preston hate, which there's never not going to be Preston hate. Okay, it's just the group that's in it, like, that they've had it for years. They have a certain idea about what Ice and Fire is based on classical fantasy writing, and they think any sort of like outside the box thinking about it, and it's not even outside the box. It's like going back to George R. R. Martin's work and realizing that like George is like really shitting on fantasy as a genre, that George, R plus L equals J is stupid, and this sort of kind of concept that's gonna make a lot of people upset. These are people that kind of like Wheel of Time, Lord of the Rings, like mindset. Even Wheel of Time like abandoned this, but like mindset of like, there's a savior who's going to save the world, and this is classic fantasy, and that there's real magic going on, and it's fantasy. Like, they're never ever going to like Preston. And I've always been like the most successful voice of this is grimdark anti-fantasy in every respect, and it's George. It's very much George. It's more sci-fi than fantasy. Like, you're never going to win those people over. So whatever. Now, specifically with regard to the fanfic, people that don't like the fanfic are like, don't understand, like, they're misreading like what George has said, and they're kind of being hypocritical. Like, George doesn't like fan fiction because he specifically said he believes it's infringing upon his business and the people that he works with. He's linked it specifically with money. There's nothing beyond it. Okay? So he doesn't like fan fiction because he thinks that this is costing him money or costing people he deals with or his friends money. That is the only reason he hates fan fiction. Now, weirdly, they asked him about fan art, and he's like, I'm fine with fan art. Oh, really? Well, doesn't that cost like artists money? Well, yes, it does. But he's not a physical painting, drawing artist, so he doesn't fucking care. So the fanfic is open, so like it's common. There's no money, there's no monetization of it. Nobody's getting paid. It's all like, it's me putting a lot of fucking time into something for free. Like, it's nothing, like, so it's not costing him any money. It's not costing him anything. So there's no copyright violations because it's open source. It's common. Anybody can do whatever they want. I've had people like message me saying, "Oh, can I put the fanfic on my channel? Can I read and analyze this? Can I do my own voiceover?" I'm like, dude, it's not mine. I don't own it. If somebody years down the line like takes the fanfic and like wants to make it into a movie, I can't do anything about it. I would get zero money from it. So it's the argument, like George's argument to be against fanfic is money related. He doesn't want to lose money. And this doesn't cost him any money. It's completely outside of like, it completely addresses like George R. Martin's like problem with fanfic, which, so if they knew about George R. Martin, which many of these people don't, like they would know that. So, George R. Martin should write wild cards and let authors write chapters simultaneously done in 3 years. Oh, he should. It would be such a money-making opportunity to like open it up like writers would write in the Ice and Fire universe. We talked about this last time. What's the Heart of Winter? This is actually something we put in the fanfic. It's a in the fanfic we have an explanation that's going to be in the next Bran chapter. By the way, it's going to be in the next Bran chapter what the Heart of Winter is. You can kind of figure it out if you read the outline. But what do I think George thinks the Heart of Winter is? Something like that. Like I think the Heart of Winter is time travel. Like more or less. Like the true nature of like time traveling Bran and everything, I think is it. There's definitely not time travel. Not. Sorry, man. There's definitely time travel. I mean, there's time. It'd be too, I understand not liking it. I understand. Like it sucks that there's time travel. I get it. The story's too big. But yeah, there's time travel, unfortunately. Bran can't be working past Hodor while escaping him, right? That always seems stupid to me when he could work present Hodor and do more, i.e. carry him. Yeah, I agree that like it's a really weird like moment in Game of Thrones when he's like, hold the door, Hodor. Like, why did he need to go back in time to scramble his brain years ago so he could hold the door in that exact moment? It's more that like he needed to go back in time to scramble Hodor's brain so that Hodor would be his legs to bring him to the tree. Like that's the real like purpose of frying Hodor's brain. But it kind of all goes together, but there's got to be some conflation of all of that kind of stuff going on at once. But yeah, Hodor needed to have his brain scrambled for Bran to get to the cave, but at the same time, like because Bran is paralyzed, but the holding the door aspect, like why not just like have him sacrifice him right then and there. This is all true. But yeah, I think if in the show, like I don't see how holding the door for 15 minutes really like does anything for them, right? It's a little silly. It makes more sense in the book because the door is at the bottom of a sinkhole. The back door is at the bottom of a sinkhole. So like if Bran gets out of the sinkhole, all the others are trapped at the bottom. He just needs the door to be held long enough so to get up the wall. Okay. I think I'm at the end of this. I've been on for 3 hours, 45 minutes here. So, AI can take over creative jobs like writing and acting. That's concerning me. I don't think it'll ever take over writing. I think people overestimate it. Acting, I think it's really ridiculous. But people are protesting now. I don't think people are going to stand for it. Every time it's done on screen, people are like, "That sucks." Like, I don't understand like why in Indiana Jones they just didn't hire the guy that played him in Solo, or the guy from the Young Indiana Jones Chronicles. Like that would have been much cooler, and saved a lot more money, right? What was the guy from? He was in Boondock Saints. The guy. Wouldn't it all have been better if like, yeah, Sean Patrick Flannery. Uh, like honestly, I understand that this picture of him is maybe is he aged a bit. I guess he's not looking so great these days, but I don't know. He's looking aged. This must have been like, is this how he looks now? Oh geez. Anyway, they could have done some things with him, but this is the guy that played young Indiana Jones in the Young Indiana Jones Chronicles. And it's like, he's aged some, but I think it's like, I think it would be much cooler had they done the scene and he shows up rather than it being Harrison Ford. Who gives a fuck what George or the subreddit anyway? Where's the book, George? I don't know. People when you Google an idea or something, the Reddit naturally comes up, and so the Reddit has a lot of power in that respect, about topics. So stuff kind of lives in that respect, but like, I don't know, like it's just people shooting the shit. But like I guess I don't lose sleep over the Reddits. I understand that like every day somebody's posting shit about Preston Jacobs that's going to live on forever on the internet. But what are you going to do? What are you going to do? All right. So Bran screws up Hodor's mind, has Jojen killed to eat him, and uses mirror to escape. Sounds like a dick. Yep. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. The copyright holder does not need to prove lost profits by the violation. The law allows for $750,000 to $150,000 per violation. Just because you don't make money doesn't mean you can't be found liable. It's all in court. It's like, that's the thing, is the law, copyright law is just like, it's whatever. Whoever has a lawyer, So I mean, like, what if George R. R. Martin wants to sue me and like for, even though I didn't make any money for $1 million, I guess you can do it. Oh well. I mean, that's the thing, is like, he doesn't need to, but that's one of the elements when you're talking about copyright, is like, does this actually like cost you money? There's a fascinating Legal Eagle video about She-Hulk, because there's a funny episode of She-Hulk where the woman is the villain decides to make a line of perfume called She-Hulk, and there is the idea of whether or not She-Hulk owns the copyright, and they go through this kind of issue, because it was actually discussed in the comic too. And the big difference between a superhero and a corporation is that a superhero is not doing an action for money. And so Spider-Man is not selling t-shirts for Spider-Man. He's going out there and being a vigilante. And so like, that's not a money-making scheme, and therefore like the copyright doesn't necessarily like apply. So like, money is like, just like, it's a factor, But again, like it probably wouldn't hold up. I mean, well, whatever. You go until you go. It's just something fun that we're doing. If George sues, that rocks. We'll get the draft wins Winter and Discovery. Yeah, I mean, the thing with copyright, the copyright law is so fluid and unwritten that it's really about like what lawyers you have and what judge you have and who decides to like sink money into something. George has more money than me, so obviously he would like win. But like, it's not about like who's right or wrong. There's no like real law to point to. It's all wild, wild west. Anyway, thank you guys for everything. I've been on here for a while, so I'm gonna say goodbye. But I'll see you guys next week. Thank you.